Live.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Apologies for the slight delay. Whilst we just resolved a minor technical matter. My name's Stephen Kelly. I'm the Joint Director of Planning for the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service and as the local planning authority on behalf of Cambridge City Council. I'd like to welcome you all, both those in the chamber and online, to the Joint Development Control Committee taking place today on Wednesday, the 22nd of June. I will cover, as this is the first meeting of the Jdccc in the new council year, my responsibility is to cover the election of the chair of this committee, and I will then hand over to the chair to continue the meeting. For the benefit of new members and for members of the public, I will roll call councillors alphabetically in the first instance to confirm they are present. And I'm aware that we have apologies from City Councillor Flober and Thornborough and South Cambs councillors Stobart and Williams. On that basis, there are substitute members who will be part of the roll call. So on behalf of the Cambridge City Council, can I seek confirmation that Councillor Carling is in the room?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carling. Councillor Page-Croft?
Here, Chair.
Thank you. And you are a substitute member?
Yes, I'm the alternate for Councillor Flober.
Thank you very much. Councillor Porrer?
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Scutt?
Is present.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith? Thank you. And on from South Cambridgeshire District Council, Councillors Bradnam?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Khan?
Present.
Councillor Fain?
Present.
Councillor Garvey? Councillor Garvey, thank you. It's not working, but Councillor Garvey's here. Perhaps we can replace that unit. And Councillor Hawkins.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. Please can any members advise if their name has not been called out or if there are any apologies. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bajent. Thank you, Councillor Bajent. My apologies for missing you. Moving to the election of the chair of this committee, the Joint Development Control Committee's standing orders provide that the chair and vice chair shall be drawn alternately from each of the two authorities. As the chair position was held by a South Cambridgeshire District Council councillor last year and the vice chair position held by a city councillor, this municipal year the chair position should be held by a city councillor and the vice chair position held by a South Cambs councillor. So with that in mind, can I please ask for a city councillor nomination for chair?
Simon Smith.
Councillor Bradnam.
I was going to nominate Simon Smith.
Thank you. So do I have a, sorry, Councillor Scott, do I have a seconder for that?
A seconder.
Thank you, Councillor. It feels like we're on the fingers on buzzers time, but that's fine. I can confirm we've had a seconder. So on that basis, are there any other nominations before we move to a vote? No? On that basis then, please can members raise their hands to vote for Councillor Smith as chair. Thank you.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. And therefore, on that basis, can I ask Councillor Smith, confirmed as chair of this committee, to come and take over the nomination for Vice Chair and the rest of the committee's business. Thank you.
Thank you. Please can I ask for a South Cambridgeshire Council nomination for Vice Chair? Well, I was going to propose, actually. Can I do that? Because I'd like to nominate Anna Bradnam. Can I ask for a seconder?
I'd like to nominate, second the nomination.
Thank you very much. Can members please raise their hands to vote for Councillor Bradnam as Vice Chair?
Voting, Councillor Bacon.
Dave?
Yeah, that's all. That's cool, Chair.
Confirm that Councillor Bradnam is Vice Chair of the committee for the rest of the municipal year. The officers present in person for this meeting are Joint Director of Planning Stephen Kelly for the Cambridge Radar application, Strategic Sites Delivery Manager Philippa Kelly, Legal Advisor Keith Barber, Committee Manager James Goddard, and Producer Gary Cliff. Other officers and public speakers will join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. Housekeeping. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under Committee Meetings, Minutes and Agendas. Please try and refer to page and paragraph numbers with the agenda if you're referring to a specific paragraph or plan. Please ensure that you've switched off or silenced any other devices you have so that you will not interrupt the proceedings. When you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. Please can those present in the council chamber note, everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, may be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Please can those participating in the meeting via Microsoft Teams indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column or raised hand option. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and can be subject to an FOI or a GDPR request. Make sure that your device is fully charged and that you switch your microphone off unless you're invited to speak. Please can meeting participants keep their microphone and cameras turned off until we come to the application we have registered you to speak about. If a report officer drops out from the committee due to poor broadband signal, the senior officer present will take over their presentation report and respond to questions. The process for each planning application will be as follows. The case officer will give a brief introduction to their report. Registered public speakers will be invited to have their say. The committee will then discuss, debate the item and may ask questions of the case officer. At the end of the deliberation, I'll ask members to vote on the officer's recommendation by a show of hands. Moving on to agenda item 2. Please could councillors advise if they have any declarations of interest and also identify which report their declarations of interest relate to. There are no declarations of interest apart from the Cambridge Cycling Campaign. Yes. Councillor Bajent.
Chair, I am a member of the cycling campaign, as you quite rightly said, but I also have a
declaration of interest or possible interest. I have, during the course of the last 5 months, visited the exterior of the Marshall site alone and looked at the existing tower, radar tower, and I have spoken to people who live in that area. So I think it's best that I declare that at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bajent. Councillor Kane.
I'm the local member for Histon and Impington to deal with the balancing pond application. I've discussed the matter with the parish council, but I approach it with an open mind.
Thank you. I'm going to take agenda item 4 next, which is the application 21/04036/REM, lots S1 and S2, Northwest Cambridge Development, Eddington Avenue, Cambridge, CB30LH. Please could the principal planner introduce the pre-committee amendments to recommendation?
Good morning, I'll just share my screen. Okay. So there's an amended recommendation to defer the application to enable further discussions to take place with the council's housing officers regarding the application of national planning policy guidance and the Greater Cambridge housing strategy with regard to build to rent.
Please could members raise their hands for those in support of the amended recommendation? To defer.
Chair, if Councillor Pagecroft wishes to finish it.
Did you want? I asked for members to raise their hands, Jenny, for support of the proposed amendment to defer the application. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's unanimous to defer then, Chair.
It's unanimous. I'll go through the formal process. Please could members raise their hands for those against? No, not again. You've just voted, Jenny. Are there any abstentions? Pete? 2. Thank you very much.
10 in support then, Chair.
That's carried. Move to agenda item 3, 21/03224/FUL, Cambridge Airport, Newmarket Road, Cambridge. I just want to check whether the people who've registered to speak are present. Christopher Drew Winslow. Adrian Stokes is online.
I think he's withdrawn, Chair.
He's online. Yeah. Will you be speaking, Adrian Stokes?
I sent an email last night withdrawing that Drew will speak for all of us.
Thank you very much for confirming that. Graham Cunningham, are you present? Councillors Copley, you present?
I'm present.
Councillor Howard, present?
Present.
And Councillor Boulat, are you present?
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any others who have registered but have not mentioned? Could the Strategic Sites Delivery Manager please introduce this item?
Sorry about that. Can you all hear me now? Lovely, thank you. Just bear with me while I share my screen to enable the PowerPoint presentation to show. Lovely. So you can all now see my PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. So this planning application was submitted in July 2021, following a period of pre-application advice and public consultation on the proposals, including a developer briefing to Jdccc in June 2021. An officer update was provided to Jdccc in April 2022, and the Jdccc committee site visit took place last Monday, the 13th of June. I just want to take this opportunity to just run through a little bit of background about the purpose of the site visit, because I'm aware of comments regarding this on social media yesterday. Just to clarify, the purpose of the Jdccc site visit was to see the existing H16 radar, to see the proposed H17 radar site, to observe the existing H16 radar in operation, and to listen close up and at a distance. The site visit was conducted in accordance with good practice guidance on committee site visits. It was led by officers of the council, and it was attended by the council's solicitor. It needed to be accompanied by the applicant for security reasons. This is because it was necessary to access the airfield restricted zone. The amendment which has been circulated to members includes a number of points of clarification. These don't change the overall conclusions, and it's not my intention to make specific reference to these changes. A table has also been included in the amendment sheet, which summarises the potential key issues in relation to residential amenity. I will refer to this in more detail later on in my presentation. The amendment sheet also includes, as an appendix, a further consultation response from the Council's Environmental Health Officer dated the 8th of June. This response relates specifically to planning conditions. It formed the basis of the proposed planning conditions which have been agreed by the applicant. The amendment sheet also proposes two modest changes to the officer recommendation, which we'll come to later, one relating to proposed condition 3 and an additional criteria relating to the requirement of the EIA regulations. The proposals, which are EIA development and are accompanied by an environmental statement, relate to land at Cambridge Airport. Two existing surveillance radars are proposed to be demolished. An existing historic radar and associated infrastructure, known as the AR-15 radar. Just going to use my, if I can find it. No, bear with me while I find my cursor. There we go. So the AR-15 radar is in this location here. Oh, sorry. I'm not getting it moving through. James, could you assist, please? Okay, I'm very sorry about that, but we're back now. Sorry. Okay. Start up again. Lovely, thank you. So sorry about that. Just to reiterate, the proposals relate to the demolition and removal of existing radar known as the AR-15 radar to the south of the airport runway, the removal of existing radar adjacent to Hangar 16 to the north of Hangar 17, and the construction of a new radar and associated infrastructure on the northwest side of the airport immediately to the west of Hangar 17, the H-17 radar. And it's worth making the point that primary surveillance radar is necessary to ensure the safe control of aircraft movements in the airspace above and around Cambridge Airport. The H-16 and H-17 radars include primary and secondary surveillance radar. It's a Civil Aviation Authority requirement. The historic AR-15 radar doesn't include secondary technology and instead relies on a feed from National Air Traffic Services radar elsewhere. These application proposals don't influence the scale of airport operations, facilitate air traffic or passenger growth at the airport, or allow current airport operations to change in any way. Now, to see the aerial view of the airport site, it helps to understand the wider context with Newmarket Road up here. I'm afraid I can't use my red cursor just because of the technology limitations, but hopefully with waving around my pointer, you can see here. So the existing H-16 radar, the arrow points to it here in the top northwest of the airport site, the H-17 radar further down to the northwest, and the primary runway here, across which is the AR-15 radar. This is a better location plan to show those sites I've just referred to. This also shows the relationship of the site to the nearest residential properties, over here in the Westering, Barnes Close, and here we have the commercial area at Barnwell Drive, which is on the opposite side of the road to the Hangar 17 site here. So the airport's existing primary surveillance radar, the AR-16 radar, is reaching the end of its operational life. Its performance and reliability is suboptimal, and it's compromised by its height. The risk of the airport being without an operational radar due to failure is high. It is also obligated to provide an alternative solution to the AR-15 radar under the terms of the Section 106 agreement for the land north of Cherry Hinton outline planning permissions. Members may recollect that this is a cross-boundary site which was granted planning permission in 2020 for residential-led mixed-use development of up to 1,200 dwellings. The site is being developed by Bellway Homes, and the developer team is in active pre-application discussions with officers regarding the delivery of that development. The relocation of the AR-15 radar is necessary because under the Section 106 agreement, the AR-15 radar would restrict the height of the development proposed on the land north of the Cherry Hinton site and could not operate effectively or safely if buildings are constructed to the parameter plan's height as approved as part of that outline planning permission. And for reference purposes, this plan shows the relationship of the site to the land north of Cherry Hinton development site. The Section 106 agreement restricts development in the vicinity of the AR-15 radar, which is located approximately here, restricting development until an alternative radar solution is brought into use. That restriction includes a sterile zone, which surrounds 150 metres of the radar, where no permanent structure can be allowed. Beyond that distance, the radar prevents building heights above 14.8 metres at a distance of 600 metres from the radar. The other radar which is proposed to be removed from the site as part of the application proposals is sited on the northern side of the airport, adjacent to Hangar 16. This radar was erected and commissioned in 2019-2020 under the airport's permitted development rights. The radar began to operate in the autumn of 2020 with the intention that it would replace the historic AR-15 radar. Since that time, the City Council's environmental health team received complaints from residents living in the vicinity of the radar. Those complaints were mainly about noise, disturbance and annoyance, particularly during the evening and nighttime periods. The noise comes from the upper motor cabin of the radar. It's a low-level mechanical noise caused by two motors which rotate the radar antennae. Following notification of the noise complaints, the applicant engaged an acoustic consultant to assess and advise on the radar noise in liaison with the City Council's environmental health team. A package of noise mitigation measures was undertaken to the radar motor cabin. Although the noise mitigation measures undertaken resulted in measured noise improvements, the noise complaints did continue. The applicant subsequently committed to relocating the H-16 radar to an alternative location. And since that time, it's the AR-15 radar continues to serve the airport. The H-16 radar does not operate. The applicant is applying for full planning permission to dismantle and relocate this radar to a location approximately 250 metres to the southwest, immediately to the west of Hangar 17. This is the Hangar 17 site here. It's close to the airport's ground run enclosure on the opposite side of commercial properties in Barnwell Drive. The environmental statement which accompanies the application provides a summary of the alternative sites which were considered as part of the site selection process for the relocated radar. It's not possible to locate the radar outside of the airport's operational boundary because of the need to ensure compliance with Civil Aviation Authority requirements relating to the security of airports. The site selection process has also been informed by noise, landscape and visual impacts and shadow flicker studies. The technical information which supports the application shows that the alternative site assessment demonstrates that the H17 site is preferable by minimising any effects. This plan here shows the main constraints to development within the airport land. These were taken into consideration by the applicant when considering the suitability of alternative sites for the radar. You'll see that the majority of land is constrained by airport operational and safety requirements, which, amongst other things, dictate the maximum height that structures can be within the vicinity of the runway, shown here as the purple cross hatching and the orange dotted line on either side of it. When these operational and safety requirements are taken into consideration, the only feasible on-site location is to the northwest of the airport, as you'll see here. When other environmental considerations were taken into consideration, including the need to minimise landscape and visual effects and shadow flicker, the alternative site assessment concluded that the most appropriate site for the relocated radar would be adjacent Hangar 17. Officers are satisfied with the assessment of alternative sites and that it's compatible with the requirements of the EIA regulations. H17 radar will take a similar form to the existing H16 radar as it will be reused in its construction. It will comprise a lattice steel radar mass structure upon which is attached the radar. The square open lattice tower has an internal access stairway above which rests the radar mount and square access platform and motor housing cabin. The radar would be secured to the primary mount and to the radar mount and comprises two dishes, an upper dish, the primary radar, and a secondary radar second dish. They will be coloured orange and white and rotate at approximately 15 revolutions a minute. It shows the proposed elevations of the H17 radar and it demonstrates the structure above the hangar building, which we saw on the earlier photograph, with a total height of approximately 43.3 metres. The existing hangar building is approximately 27.6 metres high. Show here some comparative radar heights of the existing radars and the proposed radar. The required height of the H17 radar is dependent upon the relative ground level and the height of adjacent structures to ensure that the sterile zone of the radar beam being formed isn't adversely impacted by interference with the roofs of the adjacent hangars. At 43 metres in height, the H17 structure is necessary in order for airport operational requirements to be met and ensure acceptable performance. This is the minimum height required for the radar beam to form without it being impeded by the adjacent hangar building. It would be 5.3 metre taller than the existing H16 radar, due primarily to the site ground level being lower at the H17 site than at the H16 site. The application proposals have generated over 110 third-party representations objecting to the proposals on a number of grounds as set out from section 7 of the committee report, including impact on residential amenity, principally relating to noise and shadow flicker, and raising landscape and visual impact issues. In addition to the third-party representations, a noise report was commissioned by and submitted on behalf of local residents by MAS Environmental. I'd like to take this opportunity to confirm that the application proposals have been extensively publicised and consulted upon in accordance with the requirements of the relevant planning and environmental impact assessment regulations. The relocation of the existing H16 radar to the site adjacent Hangar 17 would mean that minimum distances between the radar and residential properties are increased from 45 metres at present to just under 200 metres. Those members who attended the site visit last week will recollect the nearest residential property at Sunnyside lies on the other side of a Lungdi hedge close to the existing H16 radar. This is a long view towards the existing H16 radar, looking east down Sunnyside. You can see at the bottom there the Leylandii hedge that we saw from the other side last week, the nearest residential property just 45 metres away from that site. This aerial photograph demonstrates the relationship of the existing H16 radar and proposed H17 radar with residential properties. I'd like to point out that there are also commercial properties on the northern side of Barnwell Drive, but these are considered to be less sensitive receptors because they operate only during daytime hours. If we turn now to an assessment of the application proposals. So the proposed radar is an essential function of the operating airport. It's necessary to ensure the continued safety of the airport's operations. The principle of the development is therefore acceptable in planning terms and supported by Local Plan Policy 83, which relates to aviation development, subject to it not having a significant adverse impact on the environment or on residential amenity. In terms of design and layout of the proposed H17 radar, this is constrained by its relationship with surrounding context and functional requirements, which require it to be a height above the adjacent hangar building. The Council accepts the applicant's position that the visual impact of the radar structure would not be significantly reduced by the incorporation of a radome on the radar head. That's a structural enclosure which would protect the radar from the external environment. As such, this has not been sought to be incorporated into the design of the proposals. Given the functional requirements of the radar, the design and layout is considered acceptable in planning terms. With regard to the visual impact of the proposed H17 radar, it's acknowledged that at a height of just over 43 metres, it would be visually prominent, particularly given the rotating radar head, and would be visible from medium to short distance views. A landscape and visual impact assessment has been undertaken in accordance with the requirements of the Cambridge Skyline guidance set out in the local plan. The methodology has been confirmed as acceptable by the Council's landscape officer, who has also reviewed the assessment and the findings. The landscape and visual impact assessment has been based on a 3-kilometre diameter study area centred on the site of the H17 radar, and from that is derived a zone of theoretical visibility. Whilst the potential visibility of the radar would extend beyond this study area, views would be much reduced by intervening buildings and vegetation. The landscape and visual impact assessment assesses the impact of the H17 radar on landscape character and the group of people who may experience views of the proposed H17 radar. 12 representative views which may be affected are presented in the LVIA. These viewpoints have been reproduced and they're in the A3 colour pack that members should all have received. Conclusions of the landscape and visual impact assessment, this finds a significant adverse impact in respect of visual impacts on recreational users of Coldham's Common only. Whilst the assessment finds a not significant adverse impact on the landscape character of Coldham's Common, officers are of the view that this would be greater than assessed. This is because the H17 radar would be taller than adjacent buildings, it's different in form and potentially more intrusive to the landscape character of the common. All other landscape and visual impacts, including on residents and users of local roads and spaces around Sunnyside and Mansfield Way, the Westering and Peveril Road, are considered to be not significant given the distance between these receptors and the relocated radar. The potential landscape and visual impacts of the proposed radar can best be demonstrated with general reference to the visual images that accompany the application. This image shows the proposed radar when viewed down Peveril Road towards the airport. The environmental statement concludes that the effects would on balance be moderate and not significant. This is the existing view, and proposed you can see with the radar in the distance in the centre of the view. The next view shows the radar when viewed south down the Westering. Again, the ES concludes that the effects would on balance be moderate, not significant. It's hard to see, but it's here. Looking at them. There we go. This image shows the proposed radar when viewed across Coldham's Common. In this instance, whilst the ES concludes that the adverse effects of the landscape character of the common would be moderate but not significant, the Council's landscape officer is of the view that the impact on landscape character and on users of the common would be greater than identified, given that the radar would be taller, we can see here in the centre of the hangar buildings. So it would be taller than existing buildings and more obviously different to the existing buildings. With regard to the landscape and visual impacts, Officers are in general agreement that there would be no significant adverse impacts on receptors with the exception of Colden's Common. The proposed radar would have a significant adverse impact on users of the common and the landscape character. However, officers are of the view that the duration of the impacts would be less than assessed and can be considered to be medium, not long-term, given future plans to relocate the airport. In this respect, the applicant has confirmed the acceptability of a 10-year permission for the radar as proposed by Condition 2. Officers do acknowledge that the landscape and visual effects would be contrary to national planning guidance and local plan policies. However, it's also appreciated that the chosen location has been carefully considered in terms of balancing operational and safety needs with the need to minimise landscape and visual impacts. Whilst the airport has not been able to provide direct mitigation, the fact that the duration of impact would be medium term is considered to count in favour of the development. Turning to other environmental considerations, these are set out from section 15 of the officer report from page 41 of the agenda. The application proposals have been reviewed by technical consultees, all of whom have confirmed the acceptability of the proposals subject to planning conditions as set out in Appendix C. No significant effects are considered to arise with regard to air quality and dust, biodiversity, archaeology and the historic environment, drainage and flood risk, ground contamination or lighting. With regard to human health impacts, a health impact assessment has been submitted as part of the ES. This is a requirement of the City Council's local plan policy with regard to aviation development. Human health impacts arising from the proposed radar could be considered in terms of annoyance, anxiety and stress from noise and visual impact, annoyance and potential for epileptic seizure from shadow flicker, and impacts from electromagnetic radiation. With regard to health impacts from noise, Council's Environmental Health Officer has offered comprehensive advice, which is reproduced in Appendix D of the agenda. The Environmental Health Officer is of the view that significant adverse health effects arising from noise associated with the H17 radar are unlikely. There is no evidence base to suggest that unacceptable health impacts will arise because of the relocation to the H17 site. I'll provide more detail in respect of the noise impact assessment later in my presentation. In terms of impacts arising from visual impacts, whilst appreciating the significance of impacts in landscape and visual terms on Colden's Common and for recreational users of the common, officers do not consider this to be significant in health terms. And with regard to shadow flicker, this can arise when, due to certain combinations of geographical position and the time of day, the sun passes behind the radar and casts a shadow over neighbouring properties. When the radar rotates, the shadow flicks on and off. The ES includes an assessment of shadow flicker, which follows industry standards in relation to wind turbines, which create similar effects. The effects of shadow flicker is considered to be significant if the maximum hours per year exceeds 30 or 30 minutes on the worst effective day. Was undertaken in respect of shadow flicker, which identifies that the worst case scenarios are in terms of hours per year. These are shown in yellow on this image here. The semicircles nearest to the radar, down here above the centre line, are all commercial properties. The residential receptor, which in a worst case scenario would receive a maximum of 9 minutes per day with effects on 15 days a year, are on Barnwell Road up here. These impacts are not considered to be significant. With regard to electromagnetic radiation, a radar safety certification report has been provided. This ensures compliance with Policy 84 of the local plan, which relates to telecommunications development. It's the equivalent of a declaration for telecommunications development, and it confirms that the relevant guidelines on limiting exposure to electromagnetic fields have been met, and that the radar presents no risk at ground level at any distance from the radar. Officers accept this position and are satisfied that there's no risk to human health from electromagnetic radiation. So turning now to noise considerations, officers do note that many of the third-party objections relate to issues of noise. In addition, independent reports were submitted by MAS Environmental, challenging the acceptability of the application submission and the robustness of the noise impact assessment. Residents are concerned that the relocation of the radar will result in continued unacceptable noise impacts. The Environmental Health Service of the City Council has been involved closely in the assessment of the application proposals and has also provided detailed advice to the applicant as part of the pre-application process. The City Council also engaged the services of an acoustic consultancy Three Spires Acoustics to independently assess and advise on the potential noise impacts of both the H16 radar and the proposed H17 radar. This was considered necessary due to local concerns about radar noise and the complexity of the nature and character of the radar noise. Chris Hurst, the director of Three Spires Acoustics, has over 25 years' experience in environmental regulatory control, including environmental noise assessment, and has acted as an environmental health officer expert in a number of noise-related cases. Environmental health officers have reviewed the application documentation in full and had regard to the Three Spires report. In their view, the application proposals fully accord with the EIA regulation requirements, and the proposals have been robustly assessed using an appropriate methodology for measuring noise. With regard to noise during the construction and demolition period, this is considered to have no unacceptable adverse noise impacts. With regard to noise impacts when the radar is operational, the technical assessment submitted with the application identifies that during the daytime and evening there will be no significant adverse impacts on health and the amenity or quality of life of nearby sensitive residential receptors or commercial premises. The Environmental Health Officer supports these findings. In terms of the results of the technical assessment, daytime and evening outcomes identifies no significant risk and no observable effect level. And the nighttime outcome identifies minimal significance of risk and no observable effect level. So what does this mean? It means that during the daytime period, the predicted noise level of the H17 radar will be more than 5 decibels below the background sound levels at all of the receptors assessed, and more than 10 decibels below the background sound levels at all but 6 receptors. In terms of British standards relating to the assessment noise, this is considered to be indicative of low impacts. Similarly, in terms of the Greater Cambridge SPD on design and construction, these predictions equate to a none to minimal noise significance effect. With regard to the evening period, the predicted noise level finds noise levels more than 5 decibels below the background sound levels at all receptors but 3. This is again considered to be indicative of a none or minimal noise significance risk, with the remaining 3 in the low category. In such circumstances, the Greater Cambridge SPD advises that the proposed noise generating development may be acceptable from a noise perspective, but will be more context dependent. And then with regard to the night assessment period, calculated noise levels are below background sound levels at all receptors assessed. In terms of the Greater Cambridge SPD, 19 receptors are in the none or minimal noise significance risk, with the remaining in the low. In terms of national planning guidance on noise, this again concludes that no unacceptable adverse effect is likely to arise. Predicted noise levels are considered low and are unlikely to have an unacceptable adverse impact when having regard to industry standards and best practice technical guidance. Officers are confident, having regard to the Three Spires Acoustics noise assessment report, that any radar noise is unlikely to be audible internally or result in any unacceptable adverse impact. The character of the area around the airport is a mixed urban character, and these noise levels are not considered unacceptable in the existing prevailing acoustic environment. To ensure the radar noise complies with the predicted noise rating levels and to ensure protection of quality life and residential amenity, a number of bespoke operational noise conditions are recommended. These have been agreed by the applicant. It's noted that third-party concerns challenge the methodology and findings of the noise impact assessment. A response to this is set out from paragraph 15.89 of the report from page 55. Officers are satisfied that the methodology is robust and that predicted nighttime internal noise levels at nearest residential receptors are low, and thus unlikely to result in unacceptable adverse impacts when having regard to industry standards and best practice technical guidance. The noise levels are also significantly below desirable internal noise levels of 30 decibels for bedrooms at night, as recommended by the World Health Organization guidelines. So conclusions with regard to noise: the relocation of the radar is unlikely to result in any unacceptable noise impact to closest residential receptors. Officers agree with the conclusions of the environmental statements that operational noise levels associated with the proposed H17 radar won't give rise to any significant adverse noise impacts or effects on the health and quality of life or amenity, both externally and internally at residential receptors, subject to the conditions as proposed. Of the impacts of the development on residential amenity has been included with the submission of the health impact assessment. The key potential impacts are summarised in this table which has also been included in the amendment sheet. This draws upon the conclusions reached in the relevant parts of the report found elsewhere on the agenda, that there will be no significant impact on residential amenity. Officers agree with these conclusions and are satisfied with the recommended conditions in place, the proposals are acceptable with regard to impact on residential amenity. So moving on now to summarise the planning balance. The proposals would bring direct economic benefits by enabling the continued operation of airport operations. The applicant is a major employer, employing over 1,200 staff at the airport. The development would also ensure the development of the land north of Cherry Hinton site without constraining building heights, thus ensuring the economic benefits of the consented development. The proposals would also bring social benefits by enabling continued safety at the airport and its operations to the benefit of aircraft and crew and passengers. The maintenance of safe aircraft operations would also have wider public safety benefits, protecting communities and people living in the vicinity of the airport. By ensuring the development of the land north of Cherry Hinton development in accordance with the terms of the 106 agreement, the proposed development would also indirectly enable other social benefits to be realised. In relation to the environmental role of sustainability, it's acknowledged that the proposed H17 radar would generate significant adverse landscape and visual effects on the landscape character of Coldham's Common and its recreational users. This would be contrary to national and local planning policies, which seek to protect and enhance valued landscapes and ensure proposals which break the existing skyline fit within the landscape and townscape with no adverse impact. So to conclude, this is a finely balanced decision. Overall, the proposed development will bring significant economic and social benefits which accord with the 3 dimensions of sustainable development set out in the NPPF. But it would also bring environmental disbenefits through significant adverse landscape and visual effects for recreational users of Coldham's Common, which has recreational importance, and the Common's landscape character. But whilst these impacts cannot be avoided, the 10-year planning permission secured through recommended condition 2 will mean that long-term impacts are mitigated. The proposed radar would be contrary to local plan policies, which advise that aviation development at Cambridge Airport will only be supported where it would not have a significant adverse impact on the environment. Officers recognise that the applicant has taken all reasonable steps to ensure that the visual impact of the proposed H17 radar is minimised by its location within the only part of the airport where it could be sited, consistent with safety, operational and noise constraints, and given there are no other alternative on or off airport sites that would offer less visual impacts. The proposed development would bring about substantial safety benefits, enable existing business operations at the airport to continue and facilitate the development of the land north of Cherry Hinton site. When read as a whole, the proposal is considered to comply with local plan policies and guidance in the NPPF. And on this basis, officers are of the view that the benefits of the proposals tip the balance in favour of supporting this scheme. So the recommendation is set out in section 23 of the officer report on page 70 of your agenda, subject to the changes proposed on the 3rd page of the amendment sheet. A minor change to the wording of condition 3, and delegated authority given to officers as set out as part of the decision notice and in accordance with the Town and Country Planning EIA regulations to provide a reasoned conclusion of the significant effects of the development and carry out appropriate notification. So here is the updated recommendation and the updated condition 3 with 2 additional words relating to the following commissioning of the radar. The end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that comprehensive report. Now just turn to the public speakers. Could Christopher Drew Winlow please now make his representations? You have 3 minutes. The committee manager will ring the bell.
Thank you, Chair.
At the end of your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Drew Winlaw. I'm here representing my family and those in approximately 40 homes in my nearby area with a core interest in this issue. I know what it's like to live 150 metres away from a high-powered radar. I've suffered significant loss of sleep, tension, difficulties concentrating and heightened anxiety. And so does my neighbour who moved away after she was prescribed medication to deal with the effects of the radar noise. She needed to take time off work and was visibly in distress when she moved out. Another neighbour knows of this, moved his young family away from the area, also suffering medically from the noise and the spinning of the radar. Other neighbours at one time or another have reached complete saturation point with the cumulative intensity and in combination effect of having this radar so close. The sensation of being nearby a huge object that rotates non-stop 40 metres away above your head is unnerving. It's so close and it is audible, and at times it produces shadow flicker. The effects compound when it continues for days. You haven't experienced that even after your site visit. It surprises me that the report says there are no in-combination effects. Our community's experience, even for a few months of age 16 operating, is a valid predictor for those poor souls who will live and work within H17's vicinity if this application is approved today. It's annoying and uncomfortable for some and terrible for others. The applicant says that 200 metres proximity to residence is acceptable because it says it didn't receive any complaints about H16 from more than 200 metres away. Where is the real science in this assessment? Where is the health science? That reverse engineered justification is at the heart of this proposed H17 siting decision. It also places the radar at the on-site location that is as far as possible from the applicant's significant new housing developments. As far as we are aware, no high-powered radar has ever been allowed to be located this close to residents. Most radars of this sort are located more than 1,000 metres away from residential housing. Cambridge Airport could have its high-powered radar 1,000 metres away. That is the obvious solution and the one that we would support. It would require extra effort and extra security. The visual effects would be greater, but nothing insurmountable on the planning balance. It's feasible. The applicant, who's just posted record profits, their share price doubling just since the LNCH deal has happened, as shown on their website. The applicant could afford to do this exercise properly, but they choose not to. The city will suffer as a result and is being asked to compromise on so many local plan policies. Please vote to reject this application today. Doing so will force the applicant to properly consider the best option for the humans living in this city, which is locating the radar off of the airport site. This will allow the housing development to continue and the applicant's Section 106 commitment to be fulfilled. Save our beautiful city. Reject this application today. Thank you.
Could I now ask Graham Cunningham to come and speak, please, on behalf of the applicant? Put your speaker on, please, and it might help, Mr. Cunningham, if you sit down and get close to speak. Okay.
So thank you for this opportunity. Firstly, I would just like to thank those of you who were able to attend the Jdccc committee site visit last week and able to see the radar at first hand in its current position. And I think also it was important to hear the difference between the noise switched on and switched off, which we demonstrated. And if your hearing is anything like mine, you will have appreciated that at a distance of 205 metres, the noise is absolutely inaudible, or at worst, barely audible. And the importance of the 205 metres is obviously that is the distance that is going to be from the proposed site to the nearest residence. I'd also like to make a number of further points. Firstly, safety and security of the airport, including those living around the airport, is our #1 priority. The proposed radar is critical to maintaining this. Secondly, the radar is critical to the continued success of our business, the importance of which has been further heightened with the ongoing events in the Ukraine. As such, it is critical that the 1,200 people who work at the airport and also those working in supply chains whose jobs are indirectly reliant upon the airport. Thirdly, in terms of siting, we have examined exhaustively where the radar can be located in order to minimise any potential adverse impacts. And through that process, we have concluded that it has to be sited on the airport property in order to meet CAA regulations. It has to be based upon and through the noise experience from the Hangar 16 radar, we took the decision that it needs to be resited at least 200 metres away from the nearest residential property. When considering the distance from the nearest residential property together with the safety and operational constraints, the only area of the airport where the radar can be relocated is the northwest part of the airport. As advised in their report, and as some of you experienced during last week's visit, the proposed site will not give rise to any unacceptable noise impacts. This advice is made with the benefit of the Council's appointed expert noise advisor. The proposed Hangar 17 site will also not give rise to any acceptable shadow flicker effects. In respect of visual impacts, I can assure you that we have done everything we can do to minimise the impacts, but inevitably there will be some degree of visual impact. This is unavoidable. We acknowledge that the new site does lead to a greater visual impact on Collins Common than the existing Hangar 16 site. But that is a trade-off that we've consciously made as to ensure to protect local residents from noise, shadow flicker and from any greater visual impact. By siting the proposed radar immediately adjacent to and in the corner of Hangar 17, the effect on such views from Collins Common are also reduced as much as possible. The proposed site is the best site when taking all the factors into account. In summary, we urge you to afford significant weight to the urgent need for a replacement radar and the benefits, including ensuring the continued safety of residents and workers and the continued success of the business. To recognise that the proposed site protects residents from noise and shadow flicker effects and that visual impacts have been minimised. To further recognise, given the plans afoot to relocate the airport and redevelop the existing site for Cambridge East, that any visual impacts will be short-lived.
Thank you. I've got to be fair. I've got to be fair. So thank you very much, Mr. Tellingham. So, can we now have Councillor Copley, please?
Could I go first? Is that okay, Councillor Smith?
Go first.
Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Committee, is that okay if I speak from there? I'm Matthew Howard. I'm Ward Councillor for Abbey Ward. I have also been involved in this issue since the H16 site was erected under, as we're told, Part G, permitted development rights. A key point to remind you is that rejection of this application is not saying that it is going to stay where it is. This is saying that there should be no radar anywhere near this close to residential homes. That's not 40 metres, not 200 metres. I do appreciate the significant work that officers have put into this case. There's a huge amount of detail that's gone into it, and thank you for that work. However, on this case, there is a mismatch between residents' experience and the council's attempt to model and test the engineering parameters of this unusual industrial installation. There have been so many feedback about the noise from residents. It's not just a one-off thing. You've accepted in the report that it is a major issue. And as far as I can see, the mitigations that have gone forward exist, but are not sufficient to properly mitigate the risks in terms of persistent resident sleep disturbance, which we know is highly correlated with difficulties around mental health and well-being. I challenge you, and there is, as we know, or as may soon be known, an open ombudsman case around this issue in terms of the actual engineering standards that have been used to compare real noise with perceived noise, and the reason for that, in my opinion, is the tonality of this noise. Fine, for general noise around the city, for some industrial noises, some standards are appropriate. For this noise, it's very specific, it's at a very specific tonality, it is low frequency, and even though it rates low on the decibel scale, the perceived decibel rating is so much higher. And I have also personally experienced that. Richard Howe, in a meeting, accepted that he had a friend who lives on my street, the Homing, just round the corner, who also said, what's going on with this tonal hum? It's a real thing. I do not believe the mitigations will be significant in either of the locations, H16 or H17. The only plausible suggestion I have is, as Drew has already said, to move this radar off-site. The applicant has said that that's not possible under aviation guidance. I would suggest that's purely because of the cost of having to set up a separate security boundary. It's technically feasible. The applicant conceded in meetings with us that it is technically feasible. It would come down to having a separate boundary, separate set of security, fine, but ultimately that is a cost question. It's not about technicality, it's not about regulations. It could be done within regulations at the right cost. So I would say to you that the noise issue alone is enough to reject this radar. The table that I appreciate, Philippa, you put in your report about comparison of distances, it looks like an improvement. But that's because the applicant chose to, under permitted development rights, without a proper environmental impact assessment, build it 40 metres to a house, close to a house. Right? We can't use that as the benchmark for what is bad and then say, oh, we've quadrupled it, so now it's okay. The Heathrow radar, the most busy airport in the UK, if not the world, forgive me, I don't have my aerospace stats, it's not my favourite industry, I'll admit, but the Heathrow Airport radar is the same size as this, the same size for a massive airport. We know that this has secondary function, it feeds into the rest of the network. There's no reason it has to be exactly in this location other than convenience for the applicant. So that noise issue alone, I think, is enough. But as we've heard in the report, there are multiple other compounding factors. There's the visual impact on Coldham's Common. There is the shadow flicker impact, at least in some properties, even in the new location. I'll just finish to say that this is an emotive topic. Many scores of residents have been subjected in the middle of the pandemic to a huge amount of anxiety around this campaign. It was at the time when everyone was restricted to their homes for public health reasons, and at the same time subjected to this noise. So it is an emotive topic, and there is a lead to feel from residents' behalf that the applicant has been purposefully deceptive. I can't say that I don't have enough information to know whether that is true, but I do know that in their initial letter to us as residents, I know we can't take the general character of the applicant into account making planning decisions, but given this is directly related to this planning, it is relevant. The initial letter received from the applicant suggested they're removing one chimney and putting up a radar structure, which will be a bit higher, I think was the wording. It was very much downplayed. It was made to seem minor, and then there we were, autumn 2020, this massive, great whacking tower with a massive rotating head on the top. So there was an amount of misleading going on. But what I would say is I don't believe the applicant set out, I don't believe the applicant would have put it in H16 if they had known about the noise issue. So, and the applicant has conceded, we got this one wrong, which is the main reason we're here considering it to move to H17. So the applicant has agreed, they got it wrong, the noise was not anticipated to be like this. I'm saying that 200 metres instead of 40 metres is not enough. To make sure we go as far as possible, we need to move it to a different site. So my recommendation to you is to strongly reject this application, and the applicant then go away and figure out where better to propose for what I accept is an important part of the of the airport operation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Are Are you ready, Councillor Copley?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm Councillor Copley. I'm another one of the ward councillors representing Abbey Ward, which includes all the streets that have been most heavily impacted by H16 and all of the streets that will be or would be most heavily impacted by H17 were it to be constructed. In addition to the kind of specific and significant local impacts mentioned by residents and my colleague, I'm here calling on the committee that the application should be rejected on the grounds of its impact on the local environment and local green spaces. And so just to specify the parts of the local plan, many of which we've heard about, that this application specifically breaches the proposed radar site H17, firstly breaches Cambridge Local Plan 2018 Policy 55, insofar that it would permanently blight the local environment, including Coldham's Common, which is a site used for recreational purposes for residents from all over neighbouring wards as well as all over the city, and thus does not create a distinctive or high quality place. Second, that it breaches the Cambridge Local Plan 2018 Policy 8, in that it does not improve visual amenity with respect to protected open spaces, and would damage Coldham's Common in the future Greenbelt corridor extension from Coldham's Common towards Teversham. Thirdly, that H17 breaches the Cambridge Local Plan Policy 60. It does not enhance the Cambridge skyline and will be visible as far away as 3 kilometres. In addition, Policy 84, it has not been camouflaged or designed synthetically to minimise visual impact. In addition, Policy 34, it's proposed to operate and rotate with lighting on a 24/7 basis, drawing visual attention to the H17 high point on the skyline. In addition, Policy 35 will subject local residents to long-term, persistent, low-frequency noise disturbance, which I will detail more in a minute. And finally, that it breaches Local Plan Policy 2000, Cambridge Local Plan Policy 2000 in 2018, Policy 83. The policy states aviation development at Cambridge Airport will only be supported where it would not have a significant impact on the environment and on residential amenity. And I put to you this proposal has a significant adverse effect on the environment, especially the roads, Peveril Road, Barnes Close, Peveril Close, as well as the currently most impacted roads that would still be impacted by this proposal were it to be relocated and rebuilt, i.e. Sunnyside, the Westering, the Homing, and in addition, Latimer Close and Barnwell Road would be impacted from the new radar site, as well as Coldham's Common. And the planning statement itself admits that Policy 83 is breached, and we've heard that it's considered to have a significant effect on views from Coldham's Common, and thus is contrary to Policy 83 that's from the planning statement in the application. I'm aware that national planning guidance, local residents' feelings do not carry any legal weight, but I just want to share the huge material impact that H16 has had on residents, including residents who live at 200 metres away from the radar. And the impact of the residents' health and wellbeing in any location proposed so far is not acceptable. It's not normal for radars to be put this close to residential housing. 50 metres is what it currently is, and we are all agreed that that is completely unacceptable. 200 metres is not a normal distance for a radar of this size or any size, and it would be setting a new precedent for where radars can be sited with respect to residential housing. And there are a large number of residents who've explained to me that anxiety, depression, damaged sleep, and heavily impacted physical and mental health due to, in particular, the noise impacts of the radar. And the particular tone of the mechanical noise is not like a noise that sometimes distracts you and is annoying. It's something that gets in your head and is there all the time, all day, for those who are trying to work from home or who are in their houses during the daytime, and then at night when they're sleeping. By if this proposal were to be accepted and the radar was to get relocated, it will be a different set of residents who are closest, but the residents currently accepted will still be unacceptably close to the radar. It's not only a noise issue, it's also the moving visual effects in and near their houses and the light shadow, but it's the noise impact that has had the most damage. We've heard earlier about how residents were forced to move away from their homes and their community because they were so impacted by this radar. So yeah, just to sum up, a picture cannot do it justice. It's not a passive structure. It would be moving 24/7, 50 rotations per minute, and producing this this low tonal noise. So I bid the committee to reject the plans on this basis. A radar cannot and should not be this close to residential accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Copley. As Councillor Boulat, you want to speak now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hope you can hear me well. Good morning, committee, and sorry I couldn't be in person with you today in the chamber. I'm speaking as the county councillor for the Abbey division against the application and in solidarity with the residents directly affected by those plans. I had, as well as my, just like my ward councillors, many hours of conversations directly with residents about this issue and the various impacts on their well-being and more generally. I first wish to thank the officers and everyone involved in this for all the hard work and the detailed presentation. I know so much work has gone into this. And I also want to thank in particular my ward councillor colleagues and residents for being so involved and active in working on this issue and also speaking so well on this topic and covering most of the points I was going to cover as well. I'm really glad that this is finally debated today. I also have to say that residents have waited for a very long time to know the outcome of this. So I think it's positive that at least to have the debate today and hopefully a decision that is one that is good and positive for our residents. I would like to briefly just outline some of the objections I initially set out when I submitted a joint objection with former councillor Huff Davis, who used to be one of the city councillors for Abbey ward until this year. And I think this in a way kind of summarizes many of the points raised so far in the public representations and the councillor representations, because I was going to summarize all the local plan policies that are, in my view at least, being breached with these current plans and argue for why we shouldn't compromise on those issues in general. I do recognize, like everyone here, even everyone objecting, that an operational radar system is needed for operating the business, but it is, as the officers have said, it's a finely balanced decision. And on balance, I personally think that after I take into account the views of the residents, those directly living with this on a daily basis, that personally I am not convinced that the location is appropriate. And I also think that another location, a better location, could be found. The location as it's set out currently will still have a significant impact on residential areas, and most notably Coldham's Common, which is a very valuable space enjoyed by residents in Abbey and beyond. I'm particularly concerned about the following local plan policies that are breached in my view with this current plan, notably the visual impact, so breaching the local plan policy 8 as doesn't respond to conserve or enhance the setting, and policy 55, which Councillor Copley already covered in more detail than I was going to. Most notably in 1.6 in the report, it does say very clearly to me that the proposed radar would generate significant adverse landscape and visual effects, including on the recreational users of Coldham's Common and the Common's landscape character. So we spoke a lot about the impact on residents who would be most affected because they will be in very close to this radar. But I think we have to think about this application in terms of how it affects other residents in the city, especially those who are enjoying the green spaces in the city more broadly. So it's not only about a few streets in Abbey Ward. It's about pretty much the entire ward, or at least Barnwell side of the ward, and many other people who enjoy Coldham's Common and other spaces. The height is really concerning as well, as it was highlighted before very well, 43 meters. The radar will break the existing skyline and thus contradict policy 60, clearly having this adverse impact that has been recognized. Policy 83, again, really concerning for me as well, the significant impact on the environment and the clear impact on the residential areas that Councillor Copley already outlined. I'm also not convinced that policy 84 wouldn't be breached, given that if you think about fully minimizing the visual impact, it will actually mean finding the furthest location that is feasible, and this is probably not it. On light pollution as well, contradicting policy 34, and on noise pollution policy 35, especially we heard very good representations from residents on the noise disturbance and the significant effect it had on their lives, and in particular on mental well-being. So to conclude, I do welcome, in a way, in this report, there is a recognition on how this is contrary to some of the local plan policies. And personally, I'm not convinced that saying that this is short term or it brings some economic benefits. I'm not convinced this argument is good enough for the residents that we represent who are directly affected by this. And if you think about this, 10 years is not short term or a small period of time for people who have to live with this every day. And again, moving the issue from one side closer to other residents, again, doesn't sort out the problem. So overall, I think the council and any of its linked committees, including this one, must consider, of course, the balance of arguments, but must consider the well-being of the residents that we represent as councillors first and foremost. And I hope this is reflected in the debate following those representations today. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boulat. Thank you for that. So it's now open to councillors to comment, make statements and ask questions.
Yeah, if you don't mind, may I check, were you expecting Councillor Bennett to speak? I just wasn't sure.
She registered.
Apologies, I should have said I was also speaking on behalf of Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. So, council members of the committee, now ask your questions, make statements, comments. Anna, would you?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the very thorough reports that we've had from both the case officer and from the environmental health officer, and also the Three Spires report. I also found the site visit extremely useful, but I fully appreciate that with the best will in the world, that may not represent accurately what it might be like for people who live in that vicinity. However, we do have the report from Three Spires, who are experts. So a couple of things. I wanted to ask some questions. I'll ask all of them, and then perhaps we can have some responses to those. Sorry, the other thing I wanted to say was I'm very glad we did commission the independent review from Three Spires, because I found that very helpful, if somewhat technical. One of the things I wanted to ask was of Ms. Kelly was that we know we've been advised that H16 was installed in 2020, complaints were received, and then mitigations to the structure were installed to try and reduce noise, but complaints continued to be received after that modification. So my first question is, did the character of the complaints change if mitigation had been installed, or were the complaints exactly the same as they had been before? In other words, did the mitigation work? The second thing I've noted is that it's sort of an adjunct to that. I wanted to ask maybe the environmental health officer that we are receiving a difference in public perception, as we've heard from local members and from residents, the objectors, that is different to what we're being told in the technical report. So I wanted to understand whether whether perception is likely to be based on previous experience, or whether it can be influenced, because we can all feel fearful that something is awful, and we might not perceive any difference if we then experience a change. So I just wanted to ask about the first is, did the character of those complaints change, and why is the public perception apparently different to the technical report? I haven't come to a conclusion about which way I'm going to vote at the moment. I just wanted to ask those questions, please. Thank you.
I think both of those questions are probably best answered by Greg Kearney, our Principal Environmental Health Officer for the City Council, who is with us in the room today. Greg, are you happy to take both of those? Or
I will certainly try to. In terms of the first question on the mitigation to the radar cabin, there was measured reductions in terms of absolute decibel levels. But in terms of the tone, there was only a 3 dB reduction. And although I didn't lead on the complaints, my understanding is from colleagues is that there was no change in the perception of the noise following noise mitigation to the cabin. However, my understanding is we didn't complete our investigation to come to a final conclusion. And I think since March 21-22, marshals agreed to discontinue using the radar on a long-term basis until they looked at relocation, as is the case before us today. So there was measured improvements, but noise, as you say, the perception, and complainants did say there was no perceived change in their view. In terms of the second question, I think I understand it. You feel there's a difference between the public perception of the noise and the fact that our technical reports are saying there's no unacceptable adverse impact. I think that's the type of question. All I can say is that this has been a very challenging application, considering the history of it and the complexity of noise. It's not an exact science. And we have assessed, and our consultant, Three Spares Acoustic, have assessed the impact in accordance with sort of national standards, a British standard 4142 for industrial noise. The impact he measured in particular where we were on Monday at 200 metres in that accompanying field. He measured and did an assessment at night time on and off, and there was very little differences in the noise levels, and his report does say it's a low impact and it is 7 to 8 dB below the background. However, saying that, whilst we say there's no unacceptable adverse impact, where the noise falls in terms of the planning guidance, that the national planning guidance is between the lowest observed effect level and no observed effect level. No observed effect level is the level below which there's very likely to be no complaints, total notability. The lowest observable adverse effect is which starts having effects. So this noise in this case, particularly at night time, which is the critical time when background noise levels are lower, it falls between the lowest and the no. What the guidance says is, based on that, the outcome may be that the noise may be perceptible, but it's not intrusive. This is what the guidance says. I know it does sound contradictory, but what it says is it may be audible, but not at a level that there would be considered an adverse impact on quality of life. And changes in behaviour. There is no set level where it says this decibel below which that there's absolutely no effect. This is the difficulty with noise, and it is subjective to every individual's, but this is based upon sort of normal average levels and the assessment criteria that we've worked to. So I think the challenge today is looking at the absolute levels which are predicted to residential facades. The levels that are predicted, in our view, in absolute terms, are considered low to facades. The highest level at Barnes Close, which is the worst, is a 32 dB level. And there is a 2 dB correction added for character. The tonal may just be perceptible at those distances. Hence, we get a rating level of 34. And that is 2 dB below the background, which 34 decibels in absolute terms is considered a relatively low level. There is charts about typical noise levels, and a 30-35 decibel level would be seen as a quiet bedroom, and there is standards for bedrooms at night for internal. And when you look at the noise externally to internal, you typically get a 10 to 15 dB reduction across an open window. That 34, 32 would reduce to 22. And what the British standard for internal bedrooms recommends is that it should be 30 in bedrooms. So we're quite comfortable that that noise will be virtually inaudible and won't affect the behaviour of individuals. But as I say, the noise is not exact science, and it's a real challenge when you're getting down to absolute low levels. But as we say, our conclusion is, and our tree spares acoustic report conclusion is that there's very unlikely to be an unacceptable adverse impact. But the guidance is, it may be audible, but not to an extent that we feel it will have an adverse impact on quality of life and behaviour, and it won't significantly affect the character or the acoustic character of the area to that extent that there will be unacceptable impacts. So that's all I can really say at the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for that explanation.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have a couple of questions. And first, I just want to kind of second a lot of what Councillor Bradham said. I think the site visit was incredibly useful to us. But we can't necessarily consider it as being fully representative because we didn't go at night time. Night time's a more sensitive time. Although from the sort of the 200 distance away was where the nearest house would be, I couldn't hear anything. But again, you know, my hearing probably isn't representative of everybody, so we need to bear that in mind. I'm not sure who's best to answer the first question, but what I'm wondering is, when the H16 radar was in operation fully, were there any complaints raised from residents who were as far away from that as the closest residents will be to the H17 radar, i.e. that 200 metre, 205, whatever it was, distance? So I'm not sure who might want to answer that one. And then the second question I've got is I'd like to ask the applicant a few more details on why it can't be moved further away, as the first speaker suggested, in terms of, you said it's not possible because of regulations. I'm just wondering if you can give us some more details on why that is. Thank you.
I can take the first element. So I just wanted to make the point that the H16 radar has never been fully operational. It's only ever been run for commissioning tests and evaluation and sort of maintenance purposes to make sure it's actually working in case it's ever needed. It's been run over the last year for, I think, two days a month, and the last time was on Monday's site visit. Now, in terms of who complained and where they were located, I think Greg's probably best placed, because I think in his consultation response he actually included a plan or a map to show the locations. Is that correct, Greg? If not, could you chip in, please?
Here, yeah. Just to clarify a point that Philippa mentioned there, my understanding is that the H16 commenced operation in the autumn of 2020. It only ceased in March, April 2021, and is only run now for commissioning purposes. That's because we had noise complaints in between, and marshals did have meetings with the residents and agreed that that would be the case. However, we have never concluded at this stage that it is a statutory noise nuisance, although that is separate to planning. I think it's important to separate that because the nuisance is reactive and planning is proactive. In terms of complaints, we had 7 to 8 complaints, but they're all within, I think the furthest is 150 metres. That, you know, you got the West Rings and then you loop down to Sunnyside and you get the gates to Marshalls. So it's, our complaints are all properties in that sort of 150 is the furthest that we've had complaints. So I hope that helps in terms of comparison to
we just found the scatter map. It's page 97 of the agenda, Councillor Carling, if you wanted to just see that. And I think that does answer your question. And then, it's Councillor Scott, Councillor Bagent. Mr. Cunningham, could you please answer the question? I'm using my discretion in allowing you to answer this question. I think what we need to establish basically, how constraining are the constraints that you have cited, which have restricted you to this specific location? It's been suggested that it would be possible to locate this radar off-site, and it's been suggested that it'd be possible to locate this radar further away from the residential property. So if you could please give us the factual, technical, legal, regulatory constraints that led you to select this site, please. Thank you.
So, in terms of the site, the first port of call for us was to consult the airport director, who's the accountable manager for the airdrome. He's also the accountable manager for aviation security and the navigation services of Marshall Airport. When we was going through the alternative site selection process, I think there may be a submission, a letter written from him, which basically identified that off-airport locations would not offer the security level and the security assurance required to satisfy the CA regulations. And as part of that process, we also looked at 20 other airports around the UK, which also show that their radars are within the secure confines of their airports as well. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question.
That deals with the off-site. Can you just deal with the on-site?
Yes, sure. And for the on-site, we engaged experts in this field, consultants, to work with us to identify the next best location from obviously the Hangar 16 current location. And as part of that assessment process, all the considerations on both performance of the radar, the sterile beamforming area, the height, relative height to the local structures, together with, and more importantly, the environmental impacts, we went through a process of elimination to identify the best balance between both of those sets of considerations. And that's what led us to the Hangar 17 site.
Very much. Can I ask Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that the residents and the councillors are raising noise and the visual appearance. And my question is, on the noise, is the noise being measured taking into account the mitigation measures that have been put in to the radar tower, or is the noise being measured without those mitigating measures? And number two, on the mitigating measures, my understanding from the site visit was that everything had been done in terms of mitigation that was possible. But I do want to ask if there is any other mitigation measure that could be taken in relation to the noise, or was that the ultimate? And then on the visual question, are there any measures that could be taken to overcome the visual problem? I mean, there are issues with white light and green light and so forth that can actually ameliorate sight, but I'm not suggesting that, you know, flashing lights at all be introduced, but I'm asking if there are mitigation measures for the sight issue. And I had, a final question about the noise. My understanding is, and I really understand this, that part of the problem with the noise is that it's flat noise. It's a consistent level, and that's what's irritating, and one can absolutely understand that. So is there any measure that can be introduced in terms of noise, this noise, that would actually interfere with the flat level noise, that would not make anything any noisier, but that could vary the flat level, which, as I say, it seems to me is a very big part of the noise problem? Thank you.
Mr. Kearney, could you answer those questions, please?
I'll certainly try to. Do correct me or direct me if I haven't understood the questions or I've just lost it. In terms of the mitigation and whether the predictions include those mitigation measures, what has happened is that the noise consultant for Marshall's and our own noise consultant has measured the levels post-mitigation to ascertain a level at source. That's been inputted into a very detailed acoustic noise model which predicts the noise emissions at receptors, and that includes numerous factors such as the height, topography, reflection of buildings, the ground conditions in terms of absorption, and downwind as well, because noise tends to be worst case scenario when it's travelling from the source to the receiver downwind. So it is very much a worst case conservative assessment, and is predicting levels at the receptors, which helps us reach the conclusion on the significance of impact, which is detailed in the ES and as reported. So yes, it has included the mitigation measures. I think the second question was, has everything been done? As I've said, in terms of planning guidance, this noise falls between the lowest observed adverse effect level and the no observed effect level. And as I say, the guidance is that it will be present to a degree, but it will not be intrusive. When I say present, that will be when backgrounds are very low and propagation conditions may give rise to that. But it's very difficult to predict as and when that will happen. And the absolute levels are very low. And our view is you will just potentially perceive it when you know what you're listening for. The guidance does say if it falls in that bracket, no additional measures are required. There is this general overall planning policy that you should mitigate and reduce to a minimum. But the guidance says, with noise, there will be degrees of impact, and is it reasonable to mitigate to the inaudibility or no noise? Marshals had engaged Horley, who are a different consultant, to advise on the mitigation measures. We've asked them to check. They've checked it, and their view is nothing more can be done based upon the current location of the cabin at that height, because it's very difficult to mitigate further. We have pressed marshals on this because we're not acoustic engineering consultants, but we feel work could be done. But marshals have said that without total re-engineering of the cabin and the radar, that is not possible, and that appears to be their noise consultant's view. And I understand that there's potential warranty issues with the radar, with Thales, who are the manufacturers. So we have to take that in good faith. But we personally think further could be done. But the policy doesn't allow us to object to that because it's not clear cut. And we think it is a fine balance in terms of the noise. But based upon the guidance, it does fall within an acceptable range. And it will be a challenging one for us in the future because, as I say, noise is not exact, but we're confident with those absolute levels that they are low in relative terms. So that's the second question I think I've tried to answer. And the third one was about the flat level of the noise. I think you referred maybe to the tonal aspect of it, or I wasn't too sure exactly.
I meant that part of the problem, as I understand it, and I think everybody would, is that if you have a constant level of noise, however low it is, if people can hear it, that's actually what gets into your head, and it won't get out because of that constant flat level. And therefore I was wondering if there's anything that can be done to interfere with the flat level noise. Meaning, if you have a wheel going round, for example, the wheel goes round at a particular rate, and therefore the noise is flat level. I'm just explaining what I can see in simple terms. But if one then interferes with the rate of the wheel, it means that the flat level noise will change. That's just the way that I'm looking at it. But I'm wondering if there is some other way, or some way at all, that the flat level of the noise can be interfered with, because that then wouldn't get into people's head, which, as I understand it, is a very big part of the problem here.
Am I allowed a point of order, Chair?
I think the noise is what it is in terms of absolute levels. The only way to mitigate it further would be to take further mitigation if that was achievable. I think a big problem with the existing H16 is the tonal characteristic of it. And actually it did modulate as well, from what I understand. So I've heard the H16 at times where it sort of modulates a bit as well. But the assessment that's been done, the view of our consultant, and not the consultant, is at 200 metres, that tonal aspect and overall just general level of the noise reduces down to very low absolute limits. As I say, the worst case predicted Barnes Close is a 32, 34 decibel level, which in absolute terms is very low. But to get that down further, it would require the mitigation, as I say, and there may be other engineering, but I'm not an engineering expert in that. We're not acoustic control engineers for cabins and that would take further advice. But we're in this dilemma of where it is acceptable in planning terms on the guidance, and that is this borderline situation that we face on this one.
Can I ask Philippa to answer the question about visual amenity and mitigation?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, with regard to the design of the structure and whether any more measures could be taken to mitigate against its visual impact, yeah, that was considered, and certainly there's reference to that in paragraph 13.3 of my report on page 35. Options that were considered include, as I mentioned in my presentation, the radome structure, but also there was consideration given to whether the structure could be painted as well, both the antennae or the actual tower structure itself. But in all of these options, when we consider those, it wasn't deemed that the the end result of doing that would actually significantly mitigate against the visual impact. It would have a minimal. It wouldn't be actually worth doing because the significance of impact wouldn't be great. And there's also the issue that Greg mentioned about invalidation of the warranty for the radar as well, should any of these additional methods be carried out. But it was principally from the significance of impact consideration that we didn't require the applicant to pursue the incorporation of additional measures just because it wasn't going to have a great change in terms of what the structure would look like on those long distance views of H17. Thank you.
Just add, I was thinking in film terms, you see, that you can, in film, you can actually change visual images, but thank you.
Councillor Bajan, please.
Thank you, Chair. A really complicated and involved question that we're being asked today about should this be allowed. I've given it so much consideration. We've got scientific evidence and we have subjective evidence. But before I start, I've got to say that I've got a couple of statements about I have been employed by marshals in the past, first to certify their fire service sufficiency over a number of years, and secondly and thirdly to carry out 2 equality surveys on their staffing in the fire service and in their control tower. This happened before I became a councillor 9 years ago. So I don't think this affects me at all, but I'm just being very cautious because this is a very sensitive issue. This is happening to allow 1,200 homes to be built. This is something that the City Council will applaud. We have in fact granted planning permission for this. I've also heard from officers that there will be a noise and shadow flicker. And it's how big that noise and shadow flicker is that we have to make a judgment about. We've also been told that there is a significant adverse effect on users of Coldham's Common. There is a visual impact of this tower. And I suppose it's quite subjective as to whether people think this is attractive or not attractive. Experts have also judged that annoyance, anxiety and visual impact is not seen as significant. But it's okay if you're an expert on not having to live with this 365 days a year. There's also an assessment that all reasonable steps have been taken to ensure the impact is minimised. The reasonable step, if you're hearing a noise 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Heard, amongst other things, that people have lost sleep and had their mental health damaged by the existing location of H16. Significant too is that people 200 metres from H16 say they can also still hear a noise. There has also been a query about how does real science make these judgments. There appears to be a mismatch between residents' experience and the so-called real science. And scientific evidence has been clouded in my mind by the environmental health officer, suggesting that this is not an exact science. I've also heard that there are no examples of a radar tower of this type being placed so close to housing. I understand that this tower, which rotates 50 times a minute and has in its previous location already caused people to move their homes, is important for the running of the airfield. So I understand that the applicant admits to getting the first siting wrong. So when they built H16, as far as they're concerned, I suggest it was the right place to put it. Now it isn't. So this suggests a failure of science to an extent that the tower was actually built in the wrong place. I'm a sociologist. And sociology often finds itself in conflict with hard science. Sociology understands that today's scientific fact only exists until the next scientific fact comes along to challenge this. And as an example, it was once considered okay to test the outcome of nuclear explosions using British troops around the perimeter of what was thought to be a safe distance from the nuclear explosion. I'm presented with a second choice. And I am left considering if this is a matter of science or almost a game of chance. We'll put it here. No, it's not good there. We'll put it here. And this is so, even any sense of science directing the scientific position of this sighting is, in my mind, now in confusion. I am still left wondering whether this is the safest place or a safe place for this. So no direct question, Chairman, but a statement as to how I am weighing this up right at this moment. I don't know how I'm going to vote, but these are the factors that are going to be affecting my judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. You did mention shadow flicker in that as something that was weighing in your judgment. I'd like to ask Philippa just to make a comment on shadow flicker, just to remind the committee of the evidence about on
Certainly.
that.
So shadow flicker is considered on page 47 onwards of the officer's report to committee. A full modelling exercise was undertaken, and the results of that exercise identified that the maximum amount of shadow flicker at the worst affected residential receptor on Barnwell Road would receive a maximum, this is worst case scenarios here, which doesn't take into consideration presence of vegetation and other structures which would mitigate the maximum impacts. But the worst case scenario would be 9 minutes per day with effects on 15 days a year, all in the early morning during winter for a maximum of 1 hour and 30 minutes per year. Now that is well within the sort of the industry standards with regard to shadow flicker, which we've needed to use the wind turbine guidance in respect of that, and that names a maximum limit of 30 hours per year or 30 minutes on the worst affected day. So it's comfortably within that. So in the view of officers, there would be no significant adverse impact on human health arising from shadow flicker based on the modelling information that was presented in the environmental statement.
Chair, I understand and read that, but I also understand that there will be a shadow flicker. And so my statement was that there will be a shadow flicker. And this is again a scientific fact.
You also referred to noise. Philippa, can you just draw the committee's attention to the figure 1 on page 97 of the agenda and speak to that, please?
I believe, Chair, you're referring to an extract, figure 1, within the Environmental Health Officer's consultation response, which forms an appendix to the Planning Committee report. And this is the there's a scatter plot to show the complaints in relation to the 816 radar in the immediate vicinity, leading up to the westering and beyond to the homing, isn't it? So the little triangular points relate to the properties that we received complaints in respect of the H16 radar when it was being commissioned. Thank you.
Chair,
Then, Anna, if you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is a really difficult one. I suppose one thing I'd like to confirm, the H16 existing site is legal. I take a point about residents and things, but it's legal. So the bottom line is, this AR15 fails, that will start going. So I suppose what I'm thinking about is sort of a rock and a hard place, because actually if we decline this one, then H16, which has a far greater impact on a lot more residents, is legally allowed to be used. I appreciate that the applicant may not wish to do that, but the bottom line is, in planning terms, that is a legitimate use at the moment. So for me...
Just a moment, can Philippa please respond to that statement?
Yeah, I'm sorry to chip in quickly and talk over you, but I think it's very important for everyone to understand the position with regard to the H16 radar. So this was erected under the airport's permitted development rights, and we were notified as a council that it would, was taking place, and at that time we accepted that position. The permitted development rights provide for, well, they include the criteria that should the development that's being referred to for the permitted development purposes give rise to significant environmental impacts, then that development would require an environmental impact assessment, and it would need to go through the planning application process. A planning application would need to be submitted to the local planning authority. We have never pursued an assessment of the significance of impacts in relation to the H16 radar, because the applicant publicly on record demonstrated the intention to relocate to an alternative location. So we haven't pursued as a planning authority our position with regard to the H16 radar. That's still an option available to us. But at the moment, I don't think it's not correct to say that that's the fallback position, because we haven't explored the significance of impact arising from the operation of that radar.
Okay. So no, there's no fallback.
Thank you. No, that's what I wanted to...
Is that your point?
Yes,
Katie?
well, that's why I wanted to make sure.
Any more questions?
Yes, I had a couple.
I thought you had.
So for me, the difficulty is, within the boundaries of the site, H17 seems like the most reasonable option. You know, certainly from my experience on the site visit, it is better screened, it is further away, and obviously it is slightly closer to some of the commercial uses, but obviously in the day, and there were things like aircon running as well, which have a similar tone, which was actually, you know, louder in my opinion. So the difficulty for me is that, I mean, I'm not decided which way I'm voting, but if we were to accept, there's obviously implications that hopefully it would be fine, but if it weren't, there are implications on residents who are further away from the existing site, but still within, well, 200 plus metres. So I know we've got condition 10, 11 and 12, which are about when it's being installed. I'd be grateful if the officer might wish to comment how robust they are. So, for example, if it were put up and turned on for a test and it turned out to be bad, could that stop it? And the second thing is, I suppose the other thing I'm lacking is where else it could go. Even if we were to accept that it could go off-site, looking at my Google Maps, looking at the pictures, anywhere is near residential areas. So I suppose my concern is, what I haven't got at the moment is, if we were to reject, what would we be saying? Because I'm worried that what we don't want to do is just pass the problem on to another set of houses by putting it somewhere else. So again, I'd be grateful for your views, particularly on condition 10, 11 and 12, and what rights that would give the planning authority were it to go up and be detrimental in a way that didn't satisfy things. Because the problem is, at the moment, all the consultees are saying it's fine. And in terms of planning grounds and material grounds, and as various councillors, and I think ward councillors and objectors have said, the difficulty is the human experience doesn't appear to reflect that. So in terms of planning, it's a really difficult decision. So, thank you.
Councillor Con.
I was just looking at figure 97, and we were told that there was no complaints further than 150 metres. Well, it's 161, I think it was here. But there are 3 complaints indicated at the top of the plan. I wondered how this relates to this comment and what sort of complaints they were. Were these not about noise? What were they about? So, because that the argument the 200 metres is sufficient depends upon there not being further complaints about the noise further than the 200 metres.
Can you?
Thanks, Chair. When you made reference to figure one, I did try to interject, but I think you didn't see me. Just to clarify this plan, it's taken directly from the environmental statement, and it's Marshall's record of complaints. And what my comment says is our complainants are generally consistent with those. So our core of complainants are in the immediate up to, I think, 164, I think, 150. The other two complaints, 3 complainants further away, are Marshall's complainants. So our regular complainants that we've received are in that immediate 150. So hopefully that clarifies any confusion.
Just to clarify the point that Mr. Kearney's made, the question was, were the complaints from 14 the westering, 12 the homing and 21 the homing about noise, or were they about visual impact?
They're Marshall's complaints. I don't know. I have no record of them. That plan is Marshall's in their environmental statement. So what my comments were saying was simply our complainants are generally consistent with the core in the 150 metres. So unfortunately, I don't know.
I was going to comment that it seems clearly there is a sort of number of complaints within the 150, 160 metre range, and there's 3 odd ones out, and they do seem a bit discordant. It may be simply that people wanted to complain because they wanted to complain, rather than for the noise, and we don't know. So it's a bit curious.
We just don't know. Councillor Carling.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if there's a way we can find that out, because I think that is particularly important for us to know whether people are making noise complaints from over 200 metres away. So I would look to Marshall's, perhaps. Is there any way we can find out that information for this committee? Because I think it's really quite critical. While I'm here as well, I just wanted to kind of comment on Councillor Scott's question earlier. I think the specific question might not have been answered fully. I think the question was, can the tone of the noise be changed at all? You know, every 3 hours, every 6 hours, I don't know how often, but such that it doesn't get, it's the tone really, not the level of it. Can the tone of the noise be altered in any way? Thank you.
Ms. Kenny.
I think the tone, it can be altered by engineering methods, whether at source with the motors or the acoustic enclosure around the cabin itself. But I think the key thing to get across here, our independent consultant, when we've measured 200 metres, and when we've heard that at those distances, the noise is just perceptible, and there is a debate whether that is defined as a tone at that distance. It's just a broadband noise at 34 decibels, which is predicted. That is the worst case scenario. But noise can be mitigated in any way. But as I say, the predictions are in accordance with the planning guidance, and the absolute levels are low. But it may be present, but not intrusive. In our view, won't have an adverse impact on quality of life.
Thank you. Councillor Horse.
Thank you, Chair. I declare I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist. Okay. Yes, it is a balanced situation here. Now, I don't know how the current location of H16 was decided upon. I think this was something raised by Councillor Bajent. You know, science says they put it there and it's wrong. It was put up as part of their permitted development, right? So they did. What we don't know is how they decided that location. But what we have today is, okay, we've got the scattered diagram that shows where the complaints about noise have come from. And we can see the grouping of that within that distance up to, I think actually it was 161 meters was the furthest one. Those three at the top, when I, as a scientist, look at those three compared to the rest, for me, it seems it is something else that they are talking about, or they might just be complaining. The main issue is we've got that noise being experienced by that group that we've seen. The assessment that has been done, and I'm somebody who's used software things to do assessments, and you have parameters that you put in. The assessment has come out and shown that with the location at H17, there is not likely to be significant effect of the noise, right? The distances we're seeing the complaints coming from now. In fact, I think Philippa Kelly put up a table that showed where if it goes to H17, the closest building or house will be 190 something meters, I think. Right?
195.
195, there we go. And we don't have any noise at this point in time from that distance, other than those three at 200 and nearly 300. So for me as a scientist, looking at what we have, the fact that the assessed noise levels will be lower than what is allowed by, I think I'm trying to refer to, I had it earlier on. I think it was the WHO levels. It is definitely, as per that, not going to be a significant problem. I take the point that has been made about those who've been affected, who've had to move away, health issues. But when I look at the data that we have in front of us and need to make a judgment, which is finely balanced, it will seem to me that the location of H17 has been selected properly, and that to meet the CAA guidelines or rules, or whatever you want to call it, it has to be on site. It's an airport. It requires its own radar to work. There are other benefits, and weighing the benefits to the economy, to the district, looking at the negative side of the landscape impact, I think, in my view, the benefits outweigh the negative effects, especially when the negative effect in this case, as we've seen, is mostly visual. That's how I'm thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I think we're drawing, so is anybody else, apart from Councillor Scott and Bradman, wanting to say anything more before we go to, thank you. So anybody else?
Just checking if Philip could respond to my question about the conditions, but I don't know if you'll...
Well, can we do that?
I'm happy to wait. I just wasn't sure if you'd gone past it or not.
Sorry, I completely overlooked that one. If I can take that. So, conditions included as the appendix. We've spent an awful lot of time working with the agent to ensure that we are very confident that these are a robust suite of planning conditions that will ensure appropriate noise protective measures are carried out, including sort of the what happens, that fallback should it not be compliant with. Greg might be able to give some sort of further, more technical justification for it, but we are very satisfied that they are sound, reasonable, appropriate, and they will do the job.
So, Councillor Scott, please.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. is there not any way that we can find out from marshals what the people at 14 Westerling, 21 the homing and 12 the homing were actually complaining about, whether it was the noise or whether it was visual or whether it was something else? That's number one. And number two, I'm looking at the conditions on page 79 of the documents. And number two, I'm just wondering why there's a 10-year, it seems extraordinary to me that there'd be a 10-year period in which all this structure and equipment would be required to be removed. So I'm just wondering why it's 10 years. Thanks. And whether it could be shorter.
That can Philippa answer these questions,
I
please?
can take the question with regard to the duration of the permission. So I thought I'd covered that in my report. But the reason being is that there are future plans for the airport to relocate elsewhere as a requirement of all the future plans for their development. So I think it's 2031 is a target time for it to be, so it ties in with that. So that's why it's not a in perpetuity full planning permission. It's a more restricted time period to recognise the fact that the airport is moving forward with plans to relocate from Cambridge.
So, Councillor Bradman, please.
Thank you, Chair. I too am a scientist by training, and my concern is that we have concerns raised by residents when the H16 was operational prior to mitigations. We're told that complaints continued after the mitigations were installed. But all of those properties, bar 3, are closer to the operational radar than it is proposed that the H17 will be. Now, just come back to the real world, because all of this is estimation and not obviously the people's experience close to H16 when it was working, but what we're doing is predicting what will happen if the H17 moves. So I am particularly fortunate in that I live next door to a florist shop who run a chiller for the flowers. And that fan runs all the day and it only turns off very late at night. Now, interestingly, you think about it, there are lots of people who live next door to railways and other industrial units. And in days gone past, railway crossing cottages were built with very thick walls. But what I'm aware of is that actually a lot of people who live next door to railways, and indeed myself living next to a ventilation fan, it doesn't affect my sleep. What affects my sleep is when my next door neighbour leaves his radio on. So, do you see, actually in response to Councillor Scutt's request, I actually think this level of noise is something that you can tune out when you are used to it. So my feeling is that we have all the technical evidence in front of us from the independent acoustic engineer consultant, and we have the evidence. I personally have the evidence of my own ears standing 200 metres from the radar when it was working. Okay, it was on a day, and the loudest noise we could hear was the ventilation unit from the forum. Now, I'm just conscious that people are concerned in advance of experience, and my feeling is that we don't have the evidence to justify refusal of this planning application. We hear the concerns of residents and their experience of what it was like before, but we do not know what this will be like. But my feeling is we do not have the evidence to justify refusal. I also agree that I think the landscape impacts do not outweigh the benefits that would be gained from putting this radar in the new location. I also think it's important that the radar is within the airport confines. So that's my observation. Thank you.
I ask Councillor Peter Fane now to speak, and then it'll be Jenny. I think we're coming to the end. Sam, you've had many goes. The hum question. No.
Chair, can I offer a comment on that? The application before you is not for the H16 site, and my advice would be, although there is reference to those outlying, I think it's important to deal with the matter in front of you rather than consider the merits of H16 and the history of complaints around it. I think Mr. Kearney's given you a response in terms of the council's records and there is background on marshals, but I think it's appropriate to deal with the matter in front of you.
Councillor Peter Payne, I admire your patience and endurance, but it's now your turn, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I shall try not to test the endurance of others. I can be very brief because, firstly, on the landscape, I agree with what Councillor Bradnam has just said. This would be a fixed point on the landscape. Whilst I wasn't able to attend the site visit, I'm influenced by the LVIAs on this, and I think that will be outweighed by the wider benefits. I'm also guided by what the Director has just said. We're focusing not on H16, and I do greatly sympathise with the concerns and the real damaging experience which was relayed to us not only by our public speakers but by the 4 councillors and 1 ex-councillor who submitted to us. I accept all of that, but people within 170 metres of H16, there's reason to think they did experience real problems, but we're assessing H17. And we have had numerous advice on this, and in particular, Chris Hurst of 3 Spires Acoustics, page 145. Objective assessment indicates that noise emissions from the proposed H17 radar location is unlikely to cause unacceptable or significant adverse noise impact. And I think that on the basis of that, we have no grounds to turn down this application.
Thank you, Councillor Fane. Jenny Pagecroft, you will have the last word.
Thank you. This isn't really, what I've got to say hasn't got a lot to do with what the building is. What I've got to say is the past 30 years I've lived with severe tinnitus. Now, you can get used to these noises. It does take a while. I can sleep with tinnitus. I have it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and I have 5 noises in my head all the time, through to the fact that I have menias in both ears. So these noises, I understand they are disturbing. They will disturb people, some people who are susceptible to these noises, but you can live with these noises. You can function as a human being. You can sleep. You can get through the day. So these noises are nothing compared to what I've got in my head. That's just an observation.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Stephen Kelly now to do summing up, make a statement.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try and be brief because I think a number of members have sought to draw threads together as well. As the report sets out, quite clearly in this case, there are impacts and there are collateral effects on landscape and on local residents. The test as a planning authority that you have to bring to bear is how it sits in relation to your obligation to make decisions having regard to the development plan and any other relevant material planning consideration. And understanding Councillor Bajan's concerns about the difference between science and perceived responses to measured outcomes, it's quite clear that what we can't do is put ourselves in the minds of all of the residents that sit around and live around this site. But you're not required to do that. You're the planning authority and you're required to consider the evidence. You're required to have regard to the views that have been expressed about sensitivities towards noise, and particularly heightened sensitivities as a result of an earlier development. But as I've just interjected, the application in front of you is not for H16, it's for a new location. As the planning authority, I think one of the members mentioned you're required to use evidence and act rationally to base your decision on it. The evidence in front of you presented in the report highlights, as Mr. Kearney's indicated, and that scrutiny of the evidence highlights that there may be some minor discernible impact in terms of noise, but the planning process is not there to prevent any change in noise levels or background noise levels. It's to consider whether that change is harmful or not, having regard to all other material planning considerations. Ms. Kelly has highlighted, and indeed the report indicates, and the presentation highlighted, the constraints to siting that were identified and used to inform this planning application in front of you, which seems, on the basis of officer conclusions, a reasonable process of evaluation to identify where within the site the facility should be sited. You've also heard about an ambition from local residents that in fact an off-site solution should be used, and you've heard Marshall's response to that. But the application is the application in front of you, not for a proposal elsewhere. You've also had input and advice, and for those of you able to attend the site visit or read the documents, to help you to assess the visual impact of the proposals, and you've seen the conclusions about that. Importantly, in her presentation, Philippa also identified your requirement to have regard to the economic effects of the development and to balance those alongside the matters of harm. Now, the reason why, and it's quite right that we've spent a considerable amount of time assessing the evidence, is because any decision to be reasonable from the planning authority has to be based upon a clear understanding of those matters, and in the event that the council takes a view on a decision, it has to rely upon that evidence or evidence for its decision in considering planning appeals. Now, where you have heard evidence from officers that proposals accord with guidance or are within the terms of national planning guidance, it's important that you recognise that position determines the council's ability to argue these matters at a subsequent planning appeal and would be material. So, as I said, there are clearly sensitivities, and the proposals in a number of areas, as the report highlights, are contrary to some of your policies, particularly related to landscape harm. But you're required to balance those matters with the operational considerations that, in this case, have been highlighted, relating to the economic effects and the impacts of the existing operations on site, and to have regards to the wide-ranging representations that have come from local communities. It is a balance, as Philippa has highlighted, but I want to advise you that it would be unwise to depart from clear technical evidence, particularly where that evidence has been contextualised by reference to national planning policy, because of the council's ability to then substantiate matters in the event of any further scrutiny or examination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly, Mr. Kelly. So I'm going to move the matter to a vote now, but before we do that, I'm going to ask Philippa to read out the recommendation that we will be voting on. And the reason I'm asking Philippa to do that is because you have the recommendation as drafted on page 70, but we also have amendments on the amendment sheet, appropriately enough, on page 3 of that. So it's going to be quite a job, Philippa, to get this in the right order. But could you now please read out the recommendation that we'll be voting on?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So the recommendation is as set out in section 23 of the report on page 70, with the amendments that I will refer to on page 3 as follows. Recommendation to grant planning permission for application 2103224 FUL, subject to, first criteria, the conditions and informatives set out in Appendix C to the committee report, and subject to a minor change to proposed condition 3, to include the words following commissioning after H17 radar. Secondly, delegated authority to officers to carry through minor amendments to those conditions and informatives and include others considered appropriate and necessary prior to the issuing of the planning permission. Thirdly, looking at page 3 and the additional criteria to address the requirements of the EIA regulations. So the third criteria as follows: with delegated authority to officers to set out, as part of the planning decision notice and in accordance with the Town and Country Planning EIA Regulations 2017, Regulation 29, information to accompany decisions, a reasoned conclusion of the significant effects of the development on the environment, and to carry out appropriate notification under Regulation 30 accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Please could members raise their hands for those in support of this planning application?
And in support, Chair.
Could members raise their hands for those against?
On against, Chair.
Are there any abstentions? Thank you for everybody who's attended and watched this online and contributed to the making of this decision. By popular demand, i.e. Councillor Katie Cora, it's lunchtime. Are we ready to start the afternoon session? Thank you very much. So this is agenda item 5, S135517FL, land immediately west of the electricity pylon and foul pump station, Histon Road, Impington. 070003 NMA2, land between Huntingdon Road and Histon Road, Cambridge, Cambridgeshire, CB3 0LE. S001, I think there's 3 O's, 07 NMA1, land immediately west of the electricity pylon and foul pump station, Histon Road, Impington. Christopher Fry has registered to speak. Christopher Fry, are you present?
I am, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll invite you to speak after the case officer has made her report. Thank you,
Chair.
Chris Fry. Thank you. Are there any others who have registered but I've not mentioned? In that case, then, I invite the case officer, Charlotte Burton, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just share my screen to bring up the presentation. Can you confirm you can see the presentation, please?
Yes, we can see it.
Lovely, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Charlotte Burton. I'm a principal planner in the strategic sites team, and I'm the lead case officer for Darwin Green 1. The item is for the relocation of the balancing pond, which forms a critical part of the infrastructure for the Darwin Green 1 development. It is an item that has come to the Joint Development Control Committee before in November 2021, and the item was deferred. There are 3 items before you today. One is the full planning permission, and then there are 2 non-material amendment applications, one on the Darwin Green outline consent, and the second on the full planning permission within South Cambridgeshire for the approved balancing pond location and the primary road. And I'll go on to explain why those NMAs are needed at the end of the presentation. The pond is to be managed and maintained by the City Council as agreed through the Section 106 agreement, and the deed of variation has been signed to update the agreed commuted sums towards management to reflect the changes to the balancing pond proposed under the current applications. So the reasons for referral from committee in November were twofold as ministered. Firstly, more detailed justification was requested for the need to relocate the balancing pond, including setting out any advantages in terms of biodiversity. The second was a request for more information on the timing to secure a fully functioning balancing pond to ensure that there's no delay with the delivery of the remainder of the Darwin Green 1 parcels. And I'll come on to explain how the applicant has responded to those in my presentation. But although some members will be familiar with the scheme, I'll just give a brief overview for new members and as a refresher. So this is a site location plan, and just to orientate yourselves, this is Histon Road, where I'm showing my cursor here, and Huntingdon Road. And the north arrow will change on some of these plans, so just look out for it on the slides. For those who are less familiar with Darwin Green, the Darwin Green 1 outline site consists of this area, which is within the boundaries of Cambridge City Council. Just highlighting it here with my cursor. And there is a second site allocation referred to as Darwin Green 2 and 3 throughout my report, which consists of land to the north of that, which is within South Cambridgeshire, and I've got a better plan to show you that later on. So the proposal is to relocate the balancing pond from its approved location here, which is south of the Darwin Green 1 primary road, onto the northern side. This is the proposed site plan in more detail. You can see that the balancing pond would discharge into an existing award drain, very similar to the current proposals. And there would be an access track proposed from the Darwin Green 1 primary road, which will be a temporary provision until access is provided through the Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation proposals. What I've done here on this side is just to superimpose the proposals and the red line onto an aerial image to show you some of the surrounding features, including a group tree preservation area to the north. And you can see that underneath the existing site is currently arable fields. These are photographs that were taken by the applicant within their ecology survey, showing again mainly arable fields and some of the boundary planting. And these are the proposals in more detail, showing a comparison between the approved location, highlighted here in blue, and the proposed location, highlighted here in red. And you can see that it's a relatively minor change in location.
Sorry, Chair, could you just clarify to Ms Burton that we have only just got her next slide called Relocated Balancing Pond? So there's a long delay in the visuals.
Apologies. Would you like me to recap on anything?
Yes, please, just what you said about this plan that we're now looking at, please.
Okay, thank
Through
you.
you, Chair.
Thank you. This is a plan provided by the applicant showing the proposed location here, which I have highlighted with this red star in the context of the approved location here. So you can see that it's a very, very minor change moving from one side, the south side of the primary road, to the northern side. Just moving on to the next slide, I'll just wait for that to load. This is a more detailed plan showing the proposed landscaping and planting. And it shows some of the planting within the pond, including floating plants, marginal plants, wetland buffer planting, and also some rough grassland and tree planting within the vicinity. So since the previous application, since the application was deferred by committee, the applicant has submitted additional information which is listed in paragraph 3.6 of my report. And that includes updated site plans and sections, a covering letter addressing the points raised by members, updated landscaping and planting plans, further illustrative plans showing the context with the Darwin Green 2 and 3 proposals, an updated ecology report including updated survey information, and updated arboreal cultural implications assessment and tree protection plans. In response to the two committee deferral reasons, specifically, in response to the first reason for a deferral about the advantages of the relocated pond compared to the approved pond, a biodiversity net gain assessment has been provided. The findings are summarised in paragraph 8.22 of my report. And in conclusion, both the approved ponds and the proposed pond would deliver an 80% increase in biodiversity net gain. And this is due to the balancing ponds forming part of the biodiversity enhancement for Darwin Green 1. The proposed pond would result in more habitat units being created due to the ecologically sensitive design, including 2 permanent water bodies, compared to the dry design of the consented basin. And implementation of those ecologically sensitive design would be secured through the Landscape Ecological Mitigation Plan, which is condition 7. In response to the second reason for deferral, about the timing of delivery, I'll just move on to this plan. I'll just wait for it to load. This is a plan taken from the Cambridge local plan and shows the site allocations. So this in the darker purple, here is the Darwin Green 1 site allocation. And this is what I was referring to earlier on with in the lighter purple is the Darwin Green 2 and 3 proposals. And you can see that the pond as originally approved falls within the Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation. And the proposal is to relocate it to the area of retained green belt, which is to be delivered as a country park through the Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation. And the applicant has explained that the pond would need to be relocated in order to achieve the policy aspirations of 1,000 homes within the Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation. In terms of the specific question from members about the timing for that, the applicant has explained that the pond would need to be completed in order to drain the sports pitches, which are required to be delivered by the 400th occupation on Darwin Green 1, and that's predicted to be in December 2023. So it's important that the pond is delivered and completed before that point, which is why the proposals have come forward at this time. And since the previous committee, a planning application has been submitted for Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation. This is a hybrid planning application seeking outline planning permission for up to 1,000 dwellings and supporting infrastructure. But it also includes full planning permission for the relocated drainage pond, which is the same proposal as currently proposed in this application. But it's important to emphasise to members, for the reasons that I just gave about the timing of delivery, that members can and should determine the current application, notwithstanding the Darwin Green 2 and 3 application. Since the committee, the applicant has also sought to address some further points that were raised by members and which were proposed to be resolved through conditions recommended on the previous committee report relating to landscaping and planting. Additional landscaping and planting and ecology surveys and tree impact assessment and protection measures have been submitted. And these are all supported for the reasons that I've set out in my report. I'm very happy to answer any questions on those rather than going through them in detail in my presentation. But just to summarise that the City Council's drainage engineer and the lead local flood authority have reviewed the proposals in detail and support the relocation from a drainage perspective, and have advised that it will perform the same function in terms of the sustainable drainage infrastructure for Darwin Green 1 and will achieve the same outfall rate into the award drain. Finally, just to explain about the non-material amendments, the outline consent for Darwin Green 1 and the full planning permission within South Cambridgeshire, which approved the original balancing pond location and the primary road, include a condition which requires compliance with the drainage strategy, which referred to the balancing pond in its approved location. If the committee approved the current application to relocate the balancing pond, then it would not be compliant with the drainage strategy referred to in those conditions. Therefore, it's necessary to amend those conditions to refer to the compliance with the updated drainage strategy, which refers to the relocated balancing pond. And that is the purpose of those two non-material amendment applications. So in summary, it's officer's opinion that the application has improved as a result of the additional information requested by a committee, and the applicant has provided a good response to the reasons for deferral. The recommendation is to support the relocated balancing pond, which is a critical element of the infrastructure for Darwin Green 1. There are no amendments to report on the amendment sheet, and therefore the recommendation is as per the officer report, which is to approve the full planning application, subject to the recommended conditions, including the and with delegated authority for officers to make minor amendments to the wording. To approve the non-material amendment application on the Darwin Green 1 outline consent, and to approve the non-material amendment on the South Cambridgeshire full planning permission. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Charlotte, that's very good. Thank you very much. Can I now ask Chris Fry, who is speaking in favour of the application, to make his representations? Chris, you have 3 minutes.
Okay,
At the end
thank
of
you,
your 3
Chairman.
minutes, the committee manager will ring his bell.
Okay, thank you.
At that point, please just go straight to your, last paragraph and take a few seconds and then please finish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, and my fellow councillors and members of the public. By way of introduction, my name is Chris Fry and I'm the project planner for Barratt Homes, Cambridgeshire, responsible for delivery of Darwin Green. My role today is to briefly speak on behalf of Barratt Homes in support of this application. Members will recall that this application, which is requesting an approval to relocate the previously consented balancing pond, was considered by this committee last November. This resulted in a decision to defer the application in order to allow us more time to provide additional detailed information to address the concerns of members. You will recall that there were two main areas we had to address. One was the impact upon the biodiversity of the new location and to provide more justification on the need to relocate this pond. As far as the biodiversity issue is concerned, I can confirm that we revisited the impact on the ecology and resulting in our consultant revisiting the proposal and updating the biodiversity report, which we've now submitted to the authority. As per Charlotte's presentation, this report has shown improvement in terms of biodiversity net gain by 0.54 units when compared to the consented location that's previously been approved. In addition to this, we have also updated the ecology surveys to ensure we've not missed anything else. This identified there are badger sets to the north of the site. However, with the inclusion of the intervening ditch, it is considered that the tunnel sets will not extend into the site. The ecological assessment has concluded that the existing environment that badgers enjoy is not affected by the works and therefore there's no requirement to attain a natural England licence. In addition to this, we commissioned an updated arboricultural implications assessment, which has also been included in the pack of information submitted to the City Council. The arboricultural implications and tree protection plan demonstrate the scheme does not have any additional impact on any of the protected trees and that the proposals which were tested against BS 5837, which shows that the trees can be retained. As far as the issue of justification to move this plant, it is clear that the previously approved location compromises the ability to deliver Darwin Green 2-3, which is due to deliver a further 1,000 houses, of which 400 of those will be affordable, in line with the policy requirement SS2 of the South Cambridgeshire Local Plan, adopted 2018. You'll be aware that the proposals for this final phase of Darwin Green have been submitted to South Cambs District Council, application number 22/2528/OUT. As far as the timing when this pond is required, we have submitted a new phasing plan based on the triggers within the 106 and the build programme of Darwin Green 1, which has recently been registered by the local authority. This shows the pond is due to be required to be online by December 2023, which is when the sports pitch associated with Darwin Green 1, as per Charlotte has already mentioned, are required to be delivered prior to the 400th occupation of the development. In conclusion, we feel as though the information provided and the proposed conditions outlined in the office report should address members' concerns. We should at this point like to acknowledge the guidance and support the officers of the City Council have given, which illustrates the benefit of the collaborative relationship we have with your authorities, and we politely ask that you approve this application as recommended. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that. We now move on to member questions. It's been suggested that we make questions and statements concerning the principle of development, the impact on the greenbelt, drainage, biodiversity, landscape, trees, archaeology, and residential amenity. But I'm not going to take all of those into it. It's only if you've got a question against any of those particular topics, or else we're going to be here a long time. So I've got Councillor Braddon, which is to go first, and then Martin, and then Katie. So we'll go in that order, and then Peter, if you want to get an early signal in, and we'll go in that order. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, so I'm mindful that we looked at this in November 2021 and we asked for the deferral as has been described. And I can see that relocation of the pond into what it is greenbelt area, perhaps counterintuitively, might actually increase the biodiversity of that greenbelt area. However, we're told at paragraph 1.3 that the reason this has been relocated is to support the delivery of the Darwin Green 2 to 3 site allocation, which is for 1,000 homes and requires relocation of the previously approved balancing pond in order to achieve the number of homes within the allocation. Now, what struck me about that was the estimate made when Darwin 2 and 3 was approved, was the outline incorrect? I appreciate we're looking at Darwin 1 here, but the justification for moving it is because they need 1,000 houses in the Darwin 2 and 3. And I'm just wondering, why didn't that need for space become apparent when Darwin 2 and 3 was being approved at outline? It just seems a little bit odd. So I'm just questioning the justification of the need for the change that has brought this to this committee at the moment. Thank you.
Charlotte, can you answer that question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's important to emphasise that the 1,000...
We can't hear you, we've lost sound.
Can you hear me now? Apologies, I had my microphone in the wrong place, sorry about that. I think it's just really important to emphasise that the 1,000 homes on the Darwin Green 2 and 3 site allocation is part of the South Cambridgeshire local plan site allocation. So it's the council's policy requirement to meet up to that number. In terms of the need to relocate it, I think it is clearly part of that site allocation. But in terms of how that area is used, how the area of the existing balancing pond is used, that is a part of the assessment of the Darwin Green 2 and 3 proposals that are coming forward, and for which there's an outline application in at the moment. So I think that is the opportunity to look at how that area is used rather than in this application. I do have some plans that I can put on the screen showing the balancing pond in the context of the Darwin Green 2 and 3 proposals, if that would be helpful.
Please, Charlotte.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, just sorry, I can't see this. Can't see you, but I'll put them on the screen and talk you through them. Can you let me know when you can see the presentation, please?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so I'll just move back to the previous slide. Apologies, I did miss this in my presentation. I'll just wait for it to load. Here we go. So this is the illustrative master plan that's submitted with the Darwin Green 2 and 3 outline application. And similar to the previous slides, I've highlighted with a blue arrow, a blue star, the approved balancing pond location, and with a red star, the proposed location. So what you can see is that the Darwin Green 1 balancing pond, as per the current application, would really be integrated into the country park that will be delivered through Darwin Green, and it's entirely appropriate for the balancing pond to be in this location, both in terms of its location in the green belt, but also within the functions of that green belt. And if I just move on to the next slide. Just wait for that to load. What you can see here is a comparison really between the two landscape scenarios. So the Darwin Green 2 and 3 context, which is what I just showed you on the previous slide, but also this is a context within the Darwin Green 1 development, even if Darwin Green 2 and 3 doesn't come forward or in the intervening period. So what I'm trying to show you here is really that the proposed balancing pond is entirely appropriate in terms of the intent, the site allocation within Darwin Green 2 and 3, and I think integrates really well into what's proposed to be delivered through that site allocation.
Councillor Bradman, you have a follow-up question?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlotte. That's helpful to be reminded. My actual point is that I can see that the moving of the pond into the Greenbelt area for Darwin Green 2 and 3 is not necessarily detrimental. What I'm concerned about is the loss of green space on the Darwin Green 1 site, because this area will now be developed as housing. And the thrust of my original question was, speaking, why wasn't that identified before when it was approved, if you see what I mean? Because it wasn't, the pond wasn't on the Darwin Green site when we gave the outline approval. And in my view, at that time, I was aware that this was going to be green space. So it's the loss of green space on the Darwin Green 1 site that I'm sort of concerned about.
Yep. Through you, Chair, if I'm able to answer that question. I'll go ahead, if that's okay. In terms of what I was just trying to explain in my first response is that the current application before you doesn't propose an alternative use for this area. So you're absolutely correct that this area was intended to be part of the open space provision for Darwin Green 1. However, the current application doesn't actually propose any alternative use to that. The implications of the loss of open space are triggered under the Darwin Green 2 and 3 outline application, where an alternative is put forward. And you can see that here on this illustrative landscape scheme. And it will be a matter for the determination of that outline about the impact of those proposals on open space provision within Darwin Green 1. My understanding is that the approach to that is that the provision of open space within the country park to be delivered with Darwin Green 2 and 3 far exceeds the requirements for open space and would actually compensate for any loss of open space through the delivery of that country park. But as I said, that's a matter for the Darwin Green 2 and 3 application as opposed to the current application. And perhaps Philippa or Keith might be able to provide some further clarification on that.
I don't think that's necessary right now, but because members would need to ask their questions. So, Martin, would you like to step in now, please?
Yes, so I wasn't present at the previous proposal, so I'm not au fait with what happened in November, but it's in my ward, so I'm obviously interested about it. The particular concern that I have is that, and I don't know whether this can be tackled through the application, but so that's one of the questions I'm going to ask, is that this is going to be part of the country park. You're providing a feature which would be of interest. It's a water feature, and there's nothing mentioned about access, recreational access. This has been a particularly sensitive issue in this area because of the loss of access on the St Albans Rec. People living in Kings Meadow and Orchard Park are rather short on access. While it will be provided in a large country park, this is going to be, I presume, beforehand. What is the provision for access? How is it planned to be managed in the future? And is that an issue that you could be considered?
Charlotte, could you answer that question? I have to say that was the same question as I had too, so and probably a lot of us.
Yes, so I have checked with the case officer who is handling the outline application. It is a matter for that outline application rather than for the current application, but she has advised that there would be recreational access. And if I move back to the more detailed plan, which will load in a second, you will be able to see that there are some access trails around the edge of the pond. So I understand that the intention is that there would be public recreational access. How that is secured through the Darwin Green 2 and 3 application, that will be a matter for that outline consent.
Well, this is almost descending into a pre or post-app discussion of another planning application. So we need to set that aside and we'll deal with that another day. Can I ask, I know you're on your second supplementary, Anna, can I just ask Katie and we'll come back to you, is that all right?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I suppose mine is around the principle of development. And I am uncomfortable that we're having to consider this separately from Darwin Green 2 and 3. Because basically what we're saying is we're moving a pond. Biodiversity, great, that's fantastic. It's good that it's adding to it. But that would have been space people could walk around on. Yeah. And we're potentially building more homes on the previous thing. So if that had come in the outline, I don't know, I probably wasn't sitting on that one. But I'm frustrated because in effect, what we're being asked to do is hope that because once this is agreed, it moves, full stop. And then when the next lot comes through, bless you, Dave, we could be in a situation where it's very much argued, well, we agreed 1,000, they've all got to have, there's no open space there. And we've kind of tied one hand behind our back. And I appreciate the planners will say they have to be dealt with separately. But my concern relates to those kind of things like the access. We can't promise that now. And it's a really difficult one. I agree that the pond would add some different environmental features. It would be good to have. Bottom line is, for me, we consent this now. I would be grateful for the officer's response on what comeback we have. If, for example, I'm sure the developer won't, but were they to put lots of extra houses on what would have previously been green space? Because my concern is then we'll be told, well, it's too late. That's been agreed. You've got to judge this one on its as it stands, and that to me worries me. Sorry, that's slightly convoluted, Chair, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I'm going to ask Philippa to just comment on that, respond to that, because I think I sense that is a view that's shared by quite a few members of the committee. Anne?
My point was the loss of green space on Darwin Green 1 and the fact that it's being replaced with a pond, not an area that people could play in Greenbelt.
That is a point I think we're all concerned about. I'm going to ask Philippa to come
Thank you, Chair. So, thank you for those comments, and I can understand those concerns. I think, though, it's important to remind members that they need to focus on the application before you today. Noting the concerns regarding the other site, Darwin Green, and the outline application that's being determined at the moment, that is appropriate to consider these issues under that application for Darwin Green 2 and 3. The Darwin Green 2 and 3 outline application will still need to ensure that it's in accordance with local plan policies, still need to ensure that there is appropriate provision for open space, and still need to ensure that the issues of access to the balancing pond are addressed. The issue of the 1,000 units, it's an application, but it would be an up to. So the development would need to still be acceptable in accordance to the development plan in relation to these other issues that you're raising concern in respect of. But this isn't the appropriate forum to be discussing that application.
Yes, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm concerned about is about Darwin Green 1. It's about Darwin Green 1, which we approved with green space in this location. What I'm concerned about is the loss of green space at Darwin Green 1. That's what I'm concerned about. The space around the balancing pond.
Yeah. Now, we're almost going back to the previous meeting, aren't we, when we discussed this, and there was some degree of confusion as to whether the original balancing pond was in the DG1 parcel. But then there was it's been shown today in the plans, that it's now actually part of Darwin Green 2 and 3 and will form as part of that outline planning application. So the future of that space will be determined through that current hybrid planning application, which will come in front of this committee. Now, my understanding was, and I may, please correct me, Charlotte, was that there was going to be no public access to that, the original balancing pond. And I think that was one of our concerns, and that members are reflecting on that fact in consideration of this planning application, which is now shown to be in the Darwin Green 2 and 3 application integrated into the development and forming part of the proposed country park. But we cannot be certain of that fact until we see the full application and the detailed proposals. But however, a representative of Barrett's is listening to this and therefore will understand that that's certainly something that we will be looking for because it's something that we are remaining uncertain about, if I'm following the correct vocabulary. So we do have to listen to what Philippa says about this. When we have to determine the planning application that is in front of us, not for the planning application that we actually want to see in front of us at the moment. So have I got any more people wanting to contribute? Martin, you want to come back?
I don't know quite. I mean, one of the points that wasn't actually responded to me. My concern is that, yes, it will be determined when we deal with the country park, but the development is likely to go ahead here beforehand. And there is actually a need for replacement open space in this area because of what has happened elsewhere. Now, I don't know whether we can impose conditions to have something brought forward a bit on this particular area to provide some form of access. It's a different form of access which is actually quite needed, more informal space. Which is missing in this area, but this is for areas outside Darwin Green, so I don't know whether this is a legitimate concern that one can deal with in conditions. But that's a concern for me, that this could be provided. This could be a very useful resource right from now, rather than when the actual development takes place. The country park could be a number of years ahead.
I understand that point. I think I'm correct in saying that the reason I realise that the phasing is uncomfortable for us, okay? But there's a practical reason for this phasing, which is the pond is required in order for Barrett's to get to the 400 dwelling target, which will deliver the sports pitches, which is an extensive open space in the centre of Darwin Green. At the moment, there are a lot of residents in Darwin Green 1, phase 1, who do not have adequate access to open space and the incidental play areas and so on. So bringing forward this proposal will enable the developer to get to the point of releasing that open space, which is wanted very much by the local residents. So, Charlotte, if I've erred, please do correct me, but that's my understanding of the situation.
I've got nothing further to add on that. Thank you,
Chair. Any more questions? Any? Katie?
Are we still on principle of development, or have we moved to?
Well,
because I've got one about hedgerows, but I'm
yeah.
happy to wait if we go into that later.
Well, I mean, if it's open house. I mean, we'll we're not going to be going through every single element here. So, do you want to proceed in that manner? So, greenbelt, it is a allowed use in the greenbelt. Drainage. The lead local flood authority has raised no objections on drainage. Biodiversity, it's been explained there is a net gain.
I just checked the tree officer. I noticed he mentioned something about the hedgerow damage. So I just wondered if the officer could just mention what that is, whether it's been mitigated at all, and that she's satisfied that that can be, I think some of it related to access potentially, which might be temporary. So just wanted to check that the officer was happy with the conditions we've got to manage that and limit it as much as possible. Thank you.
Charlotte, could you answer that one, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The tree officer was commenting on a previous tree impact assessment, which during the course of the application, the scheme was slightly amended to change the location of the outfall into the award ditch. And so they were commenting at the time on slightly outdated information. So during the course of the application, the applicant actually provided an updated impact assessment, and that is summarised in paragraph 8.32 of my report, and it identifies some localised cutting back where the proposed outfall enters the award drain on its western side. I'll just highlight where that is on the screen here with my red cursor. So it does have to cut through an existing hedge line. So there would be some localised cutting back. There would be some excavation required within the root protection area of the existing hedge, but the applicant's assessment concludes that this would in part replicate the ditch excavations that have taken place and are unlikely to lead to any plant loss. And there would be some pruning that's required to facilitate the construction. They have put forward tree protection measures, and they have recommended that an arboricultural clerk of works would oversee the works near the hedgerow and ensure the quality of the development that goes ahead. So the tree officer has not commented on those updated informations, but I'm satisfied with the measures that are put in place, and that's why I've recommended a compliance condition, condition number 8, requiring the development to be carried out in accordance with those tree protection measures, which, as I said, do include a clerk of works overseeing it, which I feel is appropriate and acceptable mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. So there is a condition. More on biodiversity, landscape. Trees. Archaeology. Residential amenity. Ow. In the future, yeah.
That brings us back to I bring you back to the first sentence of the executive summary at 1.1, because the proposal is for the relocation of the balancing pond for the Darwin Green 1 site. And you're right to remind us that at that time it was not expected that there would be access. So this would not have been an area that people could have used as green space, but nevertheless, this is a change in the location which will result in, and my simple interpretation is that it allows the 1,000 homes at Darwin 2 and 3. So I think my reservations still lie around the principle. It feels as if we gave approval for one thing. I might have misunderstood it, but in the overall scheme of things, we gave approval for one thing, which envisaged a green space, admittedly with a pond in it, in one location, and that is now being moved into the green belt in order to deliver housing in this location. However, I think there isn't much in this report that would give us a justification for refusing it. because we clearly need the balancing pond to be delivered in order to drain the football pitches, sports pitches. That must be delivered before 400th occupation, which I think the officer said was due in December 2023-ish. So the benefit in terms of housing perhaps doesn't necessarily outweigh the harm to the greenbelt, and indeed it's not harm to the greenbelt because we've been shown it, the biodiversity will increase. What I'm concerned about is the area that's available to the residents of this site in terms of informal enjoyment of open space. And it's the loss of ground, if you like, that I'm concerned about, that instead of having space to walk, there's an area that you can't walk on and you can't play on because it's water. So it's just that balance and what we think is reasonable in these circumstances.
Thank you for your summary, Anna. That was excellent. So, does anybody else want to say anything on these matters? So, in that case, can I ask Philippa to sum up and bring us to the point where we can make a decision on this matter?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. So to sum up, we've heard how the reasons for deferring this application at the November 2021 Jdccc have been addressed, with further information provided by the applicant earlier this year. This is an important strategic infrastructure for Darwin Green and will support the delivery of housing on one of our allocated sites. It also offers an improvement over the previously consented balancing pond. The proposals in principle are acceptable in their own right, and the further information has been reviewed by technical experts, including the lead local flood authority and the Greater Cambridge Landscape Officer and the ecologist. The proposals have also been evaluated against the development plan and with regard to applicable national and local plan policies and other material considerations. The proposed relocation of the balancing pond is considered acceptable in planning terms, subject to the imposition of planning conditions as recommended in respect of the full planning permission. And on this basis, there are no reasons not to determine this application without further delay.
Thank you. Could I please ask members, so the recommendation is set out on section 1.9. Do you want to read this out?
Yeah, if I could read, because it's a three-part recommendation. And
Thank you. I think we should, are we making
vote on
each one?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so turning to the recommendation, which is on page 322 of your agenda. First of all, the application S135517FL. That's the full application. To approve this application, subject to the conditions listed on page 323, with delegated authority to officers to make minor amendments to the wording of conditions as required in the interests of good planning.
So, could members raise their hands for those in support? And could members raise their hands for those against? And there is going to be, I predict, what, abstention? Thank you.
Yes, moving now to the second application, which is the non-material amendment, the first one, 070003 NMA2, the recommendation to approve that non-material amendment.
Could members raise their hands for those in support? Thank you.
Finally, the non-material amendment reference S000107 NMA1, the recommendation to approve the non-material amendment.
Please could members raise their hands for those in support?
Unanimous, Chair.
All three applications are approved. Thank you. That concludes the meeting. Please could the meeting producer end the live stream? Thank you.